hang on a second. Oh, we're good. Okay. So good to see everybody. I don't know how much you know about who I am or why I'm here. I always feel like you need to kind of start with street cred. Who is this person? Why are we listening to her for the day? Or why are we collaborating with her? I guess I should say for the day. I am, first of all, a passionate educator. I am a teacher, though I'm not in a classroom right now. I teach in the evenings to kids to keep my skills up. I want to be a thought partner with all of you and a collaborator. I feel passionately about student learning and giving teachers practical strategies to make your lives easier, but also make student learning the best it can be. I am a big fan of less teacher, more student. So you can trust that I will give you strategies that are not go do all of these things, go make all of these things for yourself, but how can we hand over more ownership to students so that they can be the ones truly practicing the skills that we want them to grow across our classrooms. I am a former senior staff developer at the Reading and Writing Project, and actually that's how Sheridan and I connected way back when, and then on a random Streeterville Facebook group. But that's a story for another time. And worked and lived in New York City, and that was fabulous, but I'm a Midwestern girl at heart. I went to school at St. Mary's in South Bend, another St. Mary's. I'm from Iowa. So I moved back to Chicago a couple years ago and have been doing my own consulting, and it's been nice because I feel like I can still, I'm very much so tied to the Reading and Writing Project and the units of study, but I also get excited about working with schools in different ways. So that's my street cred. Hopefully I bring for you a broad perspective. I am not a magician. I am not, all of these things are perfect, but one of the hardest parts but best parts about my job is I see into a lot of classrooms and a lot of schools. And as much as I miss having my own school and my own classroom, I hope that that means I can bring to you some things that I see globally from the outside and help you put them to the practical in the inside, okay? That was a ramble, so I will stop there and we will move on to thinking about writing. I jotted down, I know it was on the top of the agenda. Rest assured, I will not be rambling the whole day. We'll have time to process, time to chat along the way. But when your leaders and I sat down to plan the day and we thought about our goals, and we even had discussions. Does it make sense to have everybody together? Does it make sense to have people who don't teach writing? Does it make sense to have kindergarten teachers with 8th grade teachers? And at the end of the day, what we came to was yes, because I would say there's these 5 things that we want to be our goal by the end of the day. The first one is just to help us see reading and writing as a tool for communication. The second thing is just focusing on what are, with the writing units of study being the vehicle, what are the skills that we want taught to student writers? We're going to focus on information writing today across K-8. And the reason why we're going to focus on information is because that's the type of writing that they're also doing in all of their content areas, as well as school goals. The third thing is just thinking about teaching structures and ideas for our teaching practices that are ideal for optimal, like I said, more student, less teacher. I'm gonna hopefully help us think through tools and resources that will help kids in these skills that we wanna teach. And then last but not least, some time to actually put it all to practice and do some planning as a grade team or as grade teams so that you're not sitting here getting all this input, but that you actually have a time to think about the output, okay? So is there a way to get started? And feel free to chat. I just shared our goals, but if there's anything that you're hoping to get from the day in the chat box that you wanna put now, go for it. Anything that you wanna walk away with, anything that you feel personally is like, Megan, this is what I came for. This is what I want. Feel free to put those things now or later in the chat box. To start, I want you all to think about the last time you learned something, or a time you learned something, learned a skill. You don't have to think about the last time, but many of us have maybe taken on new habits or new skills. I've started becoming an old lady and I'm needle pointing. So that's been a skill I've been taking on, but take a second and just think of like something new you've learned. And it could go way back. It could be when you were in school, or it could be a sport or an instrument. Heck, it could be when you were learning to be a teacher. Take a second and just think the last time you learned something. And as you think about that, I want you to think about what helped you learn. Besides the person or the thing themselves who were teaching you, what was it about the teaching that actually helped you acquire that skill? Just take a second and think, what did you need to become not even good at that, but better at that, to know how to do that? Just take a second. Okay. I'm going to share a slide, and I want you to just look real quickly at the 5 things that I have on this slide. And I want you to think about, were any of these 5 things that came to mind when I asked you about that skill? So here we go. Take a second. Oops, and I am just realizing I had a typo on there, but time to practice. Instruction of some sort. Some access to materials. Feedback, coaching, or time to process with somebody else. To be in a community, doesn't have to just be writing, but time to hash something out. I'm wondering, just kind of give me a signal, or feel free to unmute yourself and share if you want to. Were any of the 5 things on this list things that came to mind as you were thinking about your skill acquisition, if you will? Yes, I'm getting some thumbs up, some nods. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, and there might have been other things, but like even if you're watching a YouTube video, or when I was like trying to look at the instructions of this needlepoint thing, also like access to materials, I couldn't pick the hardest. I think it's funny that I'm using needlepoint as an example now. This must be a pandemic. Who knew that this would be the thing I'm talking about? But I'm like, you know, I couldn't get the hardest one. I couldn't get the easiest one. I needed time. Like I got started and only spent a few minutes, and then I spent longer. The explicit instruction for me was honestly reading through directions and going online and like figuring that out. So it wasn't necessarily a person teaching me. My feedback was feedback I gave myself when it wasn't working, and like knots were going everywhere. Or my mom was like, what is that again? That was some more feedback. And then I've been chatting about it a lot with people. I share these 5 things, and I share these 5 things because I think they are true of anything we learn. But to me, and if you were to look at the units of study, or you were to look at the teaching of writing, these 5 things would be the main tenets. Because when you think about learning any skill, regardless of reading, writing, math, science, social studies, needle pointing, swimming, whatever it is, there are certain things that are just the conditions of learning. And now we use other things to make these the vehicle for learning, but there's certain things that will just help our learners get better. And I think sometimes we as teachers put ourselves first, put the teaching first, and we forget that kids might learn despite us if we have other practices in place. So when we think about writing workshop and writing instruction, again, knowing that there are teachers on here who don't necessarily teach writing, I would say that these 5 things, regardless of your subject area, are things that we want our kids to have inside of their writing instruction. And I went ahead and put this up here like this because I'm just going to talk through a few really quickly and kind of chicken scratch out some additional thoughts, specifically thinking about writing and why these are our guiding principles. When we think about writing, and we think about any subject area, but we'll go specific to writing, we think about maximizing time to practice. And this doesn't just mean sit there with a pen and stare at the page, or sit there and stare at your book, but this means engaged practice. This means practice with volume and stamina. And it's important in any subject area that students are always thinking about how they are growing their volume and stamina, that it doesn't just stay the same. Even when I'm needle pointing, can I go longer? Can I stick with this for longer stretches of time? Now, we don't always have this longer stretches of time to give, but that should be one of our goals, how to get our students to really be engaged in practicing and be engaged in practicing with increasing volume and stamina. Don't worry, I'll take a picture of my chicken scratch afterwards and put it up on that Padlet. If you're wondering now, I feel like that's always a question. The second thing that we know writers need, all writers need, it's interesting because I think growing up for me in my school, I didn't get a lot of this. I got, here's a worksheet, fill it in, or make this poem, but there wasn't a lot of direct instruction. And one of the things that's really important and we'll tackle throughout the day is that we're not just giving kids opportunities to write. We're not just giving them things to fill out or saying this is free writing time, but they are getting explicit and direct instruction. And they're getting that instruction in a whole group setting. They're getting that instruction in smaller groups, and they're getting that instruction one-on-one. And knowing that all three of these types of instruction are important to move kids along their progression of learning. We know that I could have both of these things. I could have an awesome teacher, I could have time to practice, but unless I get feedback, unless somebody tells me what my next steps are, I'm not going to move forward at the same pace at which I could if I did have the feedback. One thing to note is that when we think about feedback, we're not just talking, you did it, Megan, you followed the steps, check, 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 check. I think sometimes as teachers, sometimes as schools, sometimes our parent community look for the checks. They look, did they do the assignment? But when we talk about feedback, when we talk about what will move writers, what will help students in their learning, gosh, if I had a needlepoint coach who was sitting there and saying, keep going, maybe that's a bad example, I shouldn't keep using this, but like, keep going, you got this. And then here's what you should do next, Megan. And helping me, I draw this little circle because that's coaching. That's feedback. You've got this. Move to the end of the page. Oh, what should go right there? Okay, Kathleen, pause. Slow down a little bit. Leave your spaces. I picked Kathleen, who's a 6-8 teacher, to give the primary example. Sorry. But if I'm a kinder teacher, Maureen is like, oh, pause right there. Don't wait until she's done to say leave spaces between your words. But as she's going, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? I always give the example here with feedback of thinking about like when I've had a coach in my life. I was a runner growing up and I used to run cross country, and it wasn't, my coach didn't wait till the end of the practice to be like, you didn't do any of this right. He was standing on the sidelines and like, drop your arms. Come on, Megan, drive up to the top of the hill. And it helped me in the moment know what I should do instead of afterwards when the practice is already over. Two more things to keep in mind is thinking about access to materials. And we're going to talk about this a lot today. This just means that students need to have some ownership over the things that they can use. It's not teacher giving materials, it's student access to materials. And just like we have growing volume and stamina, you want to think about giving students access to materials that are at a range of skill levels. Just because a student is in 3rd grade or just because a 4th grader is in Miss Wickman's class doesn't mean that all of those students are right at the exact same level. You are going to have students that might be at this level or at this level. And so giving them materials, even though Miss Wickman is teaching lessons that are right here for the 4th grade teaching, if I can give students access to materials at different levels, that's going to help them when they have time to practice. And then last but not least, remembering that talking is oftentimes equally as important as writing. And when students are talking, they are writing in the air. And when they are writing, they are talking on the page. One of the things that one of my former colleagues, Natalie Lewis, who actually helped write some of the primary books, she used to say all the time, and I loved this, just stick with me for a second. And I actually think this is true in our content areas, especially getting kids talking, not just getting kids doing assignments. They say that there's 2 different parallel roads. That one, this is what Natalie used to say, that one road is talking and one road is writing. And picture them as parallel roads. And the end is thinking. And so if I want my students to think, if I want people to think, if I want you to process, talking and writing are 2 parallel roads to that end. So if you have a student who's really struggling to put anything on the page, just get them chatting with you. Just get them talking. Just get them writing in the air. And vice versa. If you have this student who won't stop running their mouth, say, let's start putting some of that on the page. I mean, running their mouth in all the best ways. but just keeping in mind, of course I want them to write. Of course that's what they need to do in life, but that's only one skill. And so I share these 5 things with you just as reminders that sometimes when we get in the weeds, or sometimes when we get so focused on our instruction, or quite frankly, when we're teaching in the middle of the pandemic and we might not have time to do what we used to do, or things might be up in the air as they were when you guys were remote right after break. Just remembering at the end of the day, if you give some time, if you give some instruction, if you give some feedback, if you give them access to materials that they can use on their own and then teach them how to use that, we'll talk about that this afternoon, and you get them talking, these things will lead to learning, as they have with all of those skills that we thought about before. So just as a chance to process real briefly, so you don't get all this Megan ramble. If we were in person, I'd say turn and talk right now, or turn and make sense of that. What if this is a good reminder? What if this is really hard in your classroom? Since we don't have the turning and talking feature right now, I'm going to start with just breakout rooms, and these are going to be random to start with. I'm not going to go in grade teams right now. I'm just going to open some really random breakout rooms. You don't know who you're going to be with. And when you're in these breakout rooms, just take a breath, take a minute, I will too, to just process these 5 things, but also what does it make you think about writing in your classroom, writing instruction. You might even lead to the, or shift to the conversation of what you're hoping to get from today. We're only going to open them for 4 minutes. I'll pop around throughout, but use this as your time to chat with each other, and I'll pull us back together around 8:34. Okay, you don't know who you're going to go with. Here's where you cross your fingers that you get somebody good. I can tell that's what Anna is thinking. No, I'm kidding. Okay, here we go.
Day. So, Coach, I know this is hard for you.
Yeah.
With the writing.
Yeah,
so that was, it was nice. It was a nice confirmation of like how things are going. And
Want to have some gym time. That's what they want to do.
I was gonna say that was always our struggle. It's like trying to tell an 8th grade boy that like
his writing thing,
right,
piece of it. I guess I never really thought of it like that in those explicit terms. So I thought was
supervisor would take over and I would go lay down and I'd be like, oh, I could just sleep all day. So
I'll make a quick comment about this because it's fast.
But like I said, it might be different depending on grade level and subject level as well. But that's a good.
Great dog with the dog. Just completely. It was really pretty funny.
They're kids,
right?
So yeah,
I think that, well, sorry, I know I was just thinking about writing and comparing it to like the other subject areas, like in math, and when you're teaching phonics, like it's so concrete. Like it's like 2 + 2 is always going to be 4. A is always going to say A, but it's like writing is.
And this, we apply this to math because. So I was thinking about like the time to practice, and she said engaged practice.
Oh yeah, so this is my first week, but
I was to say, this is a rough one probably for you.
Yeah, but I mean, I could see how all the different elements.
So I thought it was really cool to see all the 5 steps in there in action too.
Yeah, definitely.
Her list.
Yes, mine was practice.
Okay, guys. I'm waiting a second as we come back. I should have said this at the beginning. If I'm lurking, you can just keep talking amongst yourselves. I'm just popping around and lurking and listening. Of course, you could talk to me as well, but that's why I'm trying to keep my screen off when I pop in those breakouts. Equally, like we do with kids, we get them talking about things to process, and then sometimes we jump in and hijack the conversation. So I try to not do that and just lurk and listen, and give it your opportunity or time for you to process. Also, I see my job as I was popping around to just hear some common trends, hear things that some of you are saying. Anna, you didn't know I was listening at that point or jotting down your name even, but at one point you were saying it felt good because it feels like this is what I do. This is kind of the rhythm we have. And yes, yes, yes. I should have started by even just saying, I always feel like in professional development, there's 3 categories. There's one category that will confirm what you already do. That's good. Makes you feel good about yourself. Hopefully the biggest category is new inspiration or shifts in thinking or just things you can add to your repertoire. And then there's always going to be things that kind of challenge you and things that you wonder. A couple other things I was hearing, knowing that some of you are, I feel like somebody threw it back to you, Andrew, at one point and was like, PE, how's this going for you? This could be a long day, but even just thinking in some of those subject areas, knowing that not all of this applies, but I do think it gives us a shared conversation, gives you a shared conversation as a school. And even as we go through things today, it's thinking about like, are there little things that do apply? Like thinking about in PE or in science, same things. That's why I had to start by thinking about needle pointing or thinking about swimming or running, because I do think all of us could probably think about how to increase those 5 areas in our students' practice. And then one other thing that came up as I was popping around, Megan, I heard you asking about, you were talking about how writing isn't as concrete as everything else. And I fully agree. And that's why I'm really excited for what we'll move into next to help us make it more concrete. Because at the end of the day, we don't want what I call kumbaya writing. We don't want, like when I was in 3rd grade, my teacher did writing workshop and it was get a pencil, get a piece of paper, go, just do something. I'll turn on the music. Like, we need explicit instruction around certain skills. And so I'm hoping it'll help us with that. And then last but not least, I forgot to get the name, but somebody in breakout room 7 was just talking about how the hardest part is thinking about engaged practice and how we could give kids all the time in the world, but if they're not engaged, then it's not worth it. And I think that's when we as teachers sometimes take back the control. In any of our subject areas. We're like, well, they're not doing what they should be doing. So instead of thinking of ways to continue their independence, I'm just going to take over right now. And so as we go through today, hopefully giving you all some practical strategies for our students to be able to keep themselves going and remain independent along that independent practice. With that said, one more thing before we segue into the next part of our morning. We have 2 other one really other big thing, well, 2 things, sorry, I was double checking. 2 things, other big things we'll tackle in this morning session before we kind of break into groups. But before we go there, I do want to just remind you all or share with you all that one of the ways in any type of teaching, okay, so we look at these, and I would say this is a coach at practice, this is in science, this is when you go to I don't know, a swim team. Like when I was in swim team growing up, there's a certain way that you can structure your time so that these things can happen. And there's a term that's out there in the education world called workshop, coined workshop. And sometimes people will call this doing the Lucy. But even Lucy would be the first to tell you that when we think about workshop, it is not unique to the reading and writing project. It is a type of teaching. And I define it this way, okay? It is a type of teaching where you do 2 things. It's a type of teaching where we maximize student practice. And when any of us are practicing, that's when we're learning, right? Sometimes I'll say school should be renamed massive practice. I would love it if school, AKA come to massive practice today. This is not like, come watch the teacher. It's come and practice. Come and have massive practice. So workshop is an opportunity to maximize student practice, to get that massive practice. The more you practice, the better you'll become at anything. There's a reason why I never learned how to play piano. I never practiced. So school, if we want them to learn things, we want to maximize student practice, and we want to move students along a progression of learning. And I would say a progression of learning being oftentimes an individualized progression of learning, because not all students are the same. And so we want to think about workshop as an opportunity to do these 5 things and an opportunity to maximize time for practice and move students along their progression. So that's why we look at it in this way. And this is the writing units of study, though, again, think of your subject areas and think if this is kind of the rhythm you follow, or if there's places where you might need to follow this more if you want to get to these learning conditions. This is, of course, how the units of study are set up, but I think it's true in any of our subject areas, that you want there to be a chunk of time for explicit instruction. So this is some sort of whole group teaching, but I can't just come and spend the entire time teaching without you practicing. Even thinking about, like, if I went to a piano lesson right now and Miss Lori lectured the entire time to me, but never let me play the keys, never let me talk about it, that would only go so far. Or if I went to swim team practice, or if I went to science club and the teacher or the adult, the person who already knew the skill, did it the whole time and never let me talk or process or practice, I would never acquire that skill, or the likelihood of it would be less. So we have a chunk of time for whole group, and then we think about a chunk of time for independent practice or group practice or group conversation. And in writing, this would be a time for independent writing. Now, as whoever in breakout room 7 said, this is hard because it's hard to get students to practice for this whole time independently and to increase their engagement over time. Thanks for playing along with my chicken scratch. So I'm not saying that at the beginning it's always going to be this way, but we want to make it our goal to try and maximize this. And I'm going to give us some help with that today. And we want to maximize the independent practice so that during that time, as a teacher, I can be moving students along their progression. And that's where we get some small group and some one-on-one teaching. And again, not all of this will apply to all of us, but it's just something to think about. And for some of our students, maybe they can be independent for 5 minutes, but our goal the next day should be 6 minutes. And our goal the next day should be 8 minutes. And our goal the next day should be 10 minutes, because we want this to be the goal of learning. And then usually at the end, when we think about a workshop structure, there is some sort of processing, some sort of share. And for writing, I'm not talking the author's chair. I'm not talking like, let's all just read our writing. But for any of our subject areas, putting an end cap to the learning so that there was a time to get some explicit instruction, a time to practice with access to materials to keep us engaged, and then a time at the end to talk or to process what it is that we learned before we get ready for the next step. I share this knowing a lot of you have already seen this when it comes to writing. It's nothing earth-shattering, it's nothing brand new, but thinking specifically today that there were different teachers from different subject areas on here, I do think a workshop style of teaching is one that we all lean on or would like to lean on more, so that we can maximize those different opportunities that we shared here, and that we can get students doing the heavy lifting, okay? I'm gonna just pause as we shift into our next topic area. If you have any thoughts about this, I'm just gonna do kind of an awkward online pause. Feel free to unmute yourself, but I'm also gonna just put in the chat a couple prompts. What are your thoughts about that? How do these teaching structures fit? What is difficult? Do these structures make sense beyond the writing classroom? If so, where? Take a second to just think about that. You can chat back, or you can just take a second to breathe. It's interesting. Yes, Erin, it works. I did, I'm laughing. I did a K-8 day on math last week on Monday, and I shared very similar things. It was not any different. It was a lot of the same thing. We get, as teachers, really focused, myself included, we get really focused on content. We don't even realize it. And we get really focused on product. So we get really focused on like, what project are they doing, or what topic are they learning about? But at the end of the day, a gift of technology is that kids can learn about any topic they want to learn about. So, you know, maybe 20 years ago, the teacher was the keeper of all knowledge, or 30 years ago, or 40 years ago. But I think remembering or reminding ourselves that that's shifted. And so it's not just about delivering content or having kids create a product, but it's thinking about how we can get them to do the massive practice. So less of you. Awesome. Two other, you guys are being great. I know this is a lot of like Megan content dump. I've got two other chunks before we have a chance to kind of break into grade teams and have some more specific conversations. I told you I wouldn't be rambling at you all day, but two big things that I want us to walk through. We are going to now segue into thinking more about information writing. Again, because that has been an identified need across the school, but also because that's an area that, regardless of our content area, although it might be a stretch for you in PE, Andrew, regardless of our content area, although not, you didn't know I was going to pick on you, sorry, just because I popped in there. But I want us to think about information writing as being a vehicle for kids to practice some of the skills that we teach in any of our content areas. So we're going to talk about a scope and sequence of information writing shortly, and then we're going to move into the practical. I'm sure you're thinking like, but I need concrete. Like, then what can I teach as a social studies teacher? What can I, in addition to my content, in addition to like that responsibility, and trust me, when I say in addition, I'm not going to suggest now you do all these other things. But those are going to be our two chunks. We're going to talk through just what information writing does look like, K-8, and then we're going to talk practical, some tools and resources that we're going to be able to kind of unpack and have conversations around in grade teams, okay? So with the last one, I had you think about what things as a person have you learned, and what were some of those conditions. Now, your little prompt for thinking, and you can jot these down. You can do a little waterfall in the chat box and just fill her up if you want to. Hint, hint, talk amongst yourselves or not. I want you to just jot down or write or think in your mind any opportunities. Again, it might be a stretch for a few specialists out there, but what are all the opportunities in your class that students have to write in an informational genre? Not a full informational writing unit, but any sort of information writing, or writing about information gained. Even just think practically this year, what output, what writing have students done that you would classify as information writing or research writing? Yep, beautiful. Yeah. Warm-ups, answering focused questions. Yep. Seminar preparation. Even in our younger grades, it might not be a writing unit, but yes, reflections in religion. Religion is a perfect example of information writing. All of our students are in religion, and all of them in religion are getting a lot of information writing. Yep, explaining their reasoning. Even just answering problems, like word problems in math, or explanation, yes, using vocabulary. Sometimes it's even just a fill in the blank. Like, think of even vocabulary, think of word work, think of vocabulary where you're doing that. Yep. Study guides, how do you know questions, even morning meeting when we ask them to like talk about certain things that have happened in our world, or we share certain things with them. Yes, yes, yes. So you guys get my point. I could even ask you right now, what was the last information writing you did? You might be like, I don't know, I'm not in school. Some of you might be in school right now, but even just emails that you've sent, documents you've made for parents, study guides you've made for kids, worksheets you've made for kids, that is all information writing. So when we think about information writing historically, for myself, and even if you just look across curriculums in any area, historically it was a genre that was not taught in writing instruction. It was not until Common Core that information writing really became its own genre of writing to explicitly teach. And the reasoning for that, Tony Wagner is a researcher who's done a lot of work around that, is because teachers were saying, yes, parent update, you guys are awesome, good, keep talking amongst yourselves. But teachers were saying, we don't need to have an information writing unit because they're doing information writing in all these other areas. Think about across their day, they do enough information writing. We don't need to teach that. But the shift was they're doing the writing. That doesn't mean they're being taught how to do the writing. And yes, they might do okay when I give a worksheet or I give a heavily scaffolded thing, but nobody is saying to them, here's how you craft that on your own. And so when we think about information writing, the reason why I would say it's most important, Tony Wagner, a researcher, would say it's most important, because it is the genre that will most help students throughout their academic career. Narrative is what helps you relate to people. Opinion is what helps you exist in the world and have an opinion and state it. Information is what helps you get through your academic career. Information is the type of writing that will help you through everything, through all content areas, through high school, middle school, beyond. So when we think about information writing, that is how important it is. As I share this next piece, some of you that aren't writing teachers, this is going to feel kind of off for a second, but you might just be thinking as I share it, what are the things that we teach in information writing? Those of us who teach writing workshop, this is going to resonate with you for your units, and you'll want to think what comes before and what comes after. Grade team or content area teachers, as I share this, you might even be thinking, what types of this writing do students do in your content areas? Okay, so AKA apply it to what fits for you. But I want us to just spend a couple minutes, and I'm going to talk you through kind of the method to the madness with the units of study. And I'm doing this very intentional. You know your units, but I want you to think about how skills progress across K-8. How do you move from one grade level to the next when it comes to information writing experiences? So the kindergarten unit of study in information writing is where students are writing how-to books. They're writing books that explain something very concrete. And by books, I mean packets of paper, but it's very easy for them to say how to unpack my backpack, how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, literally thinking through step 1, step 2, and step 3. How-to writing is the most basic and easiest type of information writing. Even right now, if I said, write some information piece, you'd look at me like I had 10 heads. And then if I said, write down your steps for how to sign on to Zoom, you'd be like, got it, 1, 2, 3, let me go for it. So how to is at its most basic form, the easiest type of information writing. It's important to keep that in mind if we teach in other grade levels. When students lean back on how to writing, it's because it's easy for them or easier. Now, the second type of information writing that we teach, or kinder, builds to first. And in first grade is where students are writing nonfiction chapter books. And I'm putting this in quotes because it's not really a chapter book. It's a packet of paper, but they're learning it's all about. So I can write a chapter book about soccer, a chapter book about dance, a chapter book about swimming, a chapter book about Old St. Mary's, a chapter book about first grade. There is no research inside of this unit. It is chapter books or all about of topics of interest. So things that are known, not things that are new. So this is why first grade teachers, we might be thinking, I am so tired of reading about dogs. I am so tired of reading about the snow. I'm so tired of reading about the playground. But you got to understand that they're in first grade, and I am trying to teach them how to craft an information book, not just fill one out. So that then when they go to religion, I can have them try and write something in religion, maybe make a nonfiction chapter book about a saint or make a nonfiction chapter book about the Eucharist, because they know how to do that with a topic that they do know about. The next place we can move when we move into, or the next place we do move in second grade, the second grade unit of study, science teachers, perk up, middle school science teachers, listen in, because this is interesting. In second grade, the unit of study is called, oops, I was trying to keep my colors back and forth to make it more clear for you guys. It's called lab reports. And in second grade, students have a unit called lab reports. It's a hard unit. Second grade teachers get super intimidated by it because they're like, lab reports? What? They're in second grade. But here's the deal. They learned how to write chapter books. So now you say, do a little experiment and write about it. And it's as simple as blow a cotton ball across the table, or drop this pen and drop this something that weighs more, and which one is going to go faster. Blow a cotton ball across the carpet versus blowing a cotton ball across a smooth surface. So these lab reports are really students writing chapter books about something unknown. So they do these little books where, like, on one page, what they think is going to happen, their hypothesis, another page, the how-to of what they did, and on a final page, a conclusion of what they learned. So science teachers, as we think about that, down to this very early level, students are learning that information writing gets carried into the content areas. I didn't ask this ahead of time, but there is another standalone unit. I don't know if you guys have it, but the Reading and Writing Project came out with another how-to unit in second grade that's a standalone unit, because second grade teachers, quite frankly, were complaining about this unit, but saying it was really hard. And it is hard, but at the end of the day, I share that because it's basically a how-to, or could be a how-to. You could look at the lab reports as a how-to about science. Now in third grade, and I'm gonna draw a little line because the units of study are written to be K2, and then 3-5, and finally 6-8. So they kind of clump together. In third grade, students' information unit is called the Art of Information. And this is really important to listen into. I think this will be informative for all of us. The key to this unit is teaching students how to make their own organization for information writing. Meaning, instead of a teacher saying, you need a page on, we're gonna write about animals, you need a page on habitats, you need a page on life cycle, you need a page on vocabulary terms. This unit tries to teach kids how to do that on their own. So you are trying to teach kids how to take a topic, and without a teacher assigning you the categories, I want students to be able to come up with the categories on their own. It is hard, it is not easy, but it is an important skill that I think our content area teachers in middle school would agree students need. They need to know how to take a topic and think about the different parts. This unit, Art of Information, is not a research unit. Again, this unit is where students are doing topics of personal expertise. So they are not doing a ton of research. They're writing about things that they know. So I have one girl say that she wants to write about fashion. I'm like, great. She wasn't going to do a bunch of research, but she did a chapter that was about tops, a chapter about bottoms, a chapter about shoes, or a chapter about first grade fashion, a chapter about second grade fashion, a chapter about third grade fashion. You get it. It's an all about. Now here's where we start to segue into more content. This has some science in it, but in fourth grade, the unit is called Bringing History to Life. And social studies teachers, again, perk up right here, because it's important to note that this unit is the first time where students are really focused on taking writing and taking what they're learning in social studies and putting the two together. However, this unit was meant to be that they learn first. So they learn about a content area first. They get most of their social studies unit first, and then they write about it. So it's the idea would be your social studies unit comes first, and then I write my research report. I become the expert, and then I put it on the page. Versus in fifth grade, the unit is called Lens of History. And in that unit, students are doing the research / learning, pardon my chicken scratch, together with the writing all at once. So these things are together versus in 4th grade, it's more learn about it first and then write the piece. Does that make sense to you guys? So it's become the expert and write about it. This has become the expert while you're writing about it. And then last but not least, and then we'll have a chance to process, last but not least, we think about 6, 7, and 8, and those, that being another chunk that goes together. And when we think about 6, 7, and 8, and I'll take a picture of my chicken scratch if it's helpful, and I also have a slide. I just find it helpful to kind of write through it. In 6th grade, students have a unit called research-based information writing. And content area teachers, this is important to know because students pick their topics and they literally learn how to go through a process of researching and putting it on the page without somebody else delivering the content. So it's a really, it's a unit where you are teaching them something that they will be using through the rest of their academic career. And it's all about teaching them a research process. What are our steps for research? How do people research? More than the content. 7th grade is kind of a unique unit. It's called a writing about reading unit, or the unit is called writing about reading. And this is an interesting spin because kids will start to think, wait, this is not, I'm not writing about reading, but it's not literary essay. It's more things I've learned about the character, what I'm thinking about the author. They make what you call companion books to go alongside of their books. So they are literally writing about the texts that they're reading, the authors that they're reading. 7th grade teachers, one of the main reasons why this was put in your unit is because in middle school, or in your sequence, in middle school, our time sometimes is pulled for teaching reading and writing. And so this was seen as an opportunity in the middle of their middle school years to really make that reading and writing connection. And then last but not least, in 8th grade, they end with a unit called investigative journalism. Think Law and Order. No, I'm kidding. It's not like that. But it's kind of picking topics that are going on in the world. How do I investigate it? And then how do I report on it? This is a lot. Again, this is Megan Chicken Scratch, and I can share it up on a slide as well, and I will, and I'll put that on the Padlet. But I share it because I think it's really helpful to know what comes before and what comes after. And to know that if I am a middle school science teacher, that's not their first opportunity for making their own categories. So maybe I say, here's your report and these are the main sections you're gonna do. But could I make the shift to starting to say, here's what you need to do in the report, you decide what sections you're gonna include. Because that's what they learned down in 3rd grade. And how great would it be to continue practicing these skills over the years? Or to say, I know you've learned what it means to put your history learning on the page. Let's try some of that together. So regardless of our content area, leaning on some of these explicit units and skills can really help us help kids transfer their learning from the writing classroom to any classroom. And I think that was one of our goals for the day, was to say, how can we take what they learn in writing and apply it across their day so that it's not just this one unit in the writing workshop classroom, but to really, this goes back to what even Diane said in her email, writing is a tool for communication. Writing is essential to exist in the world. Writing is essential to achieve in school. So if we can keep this in mind and then say to ourselves, how can we provide other opportunities for kids to practice these things across our days, then I think we'll start to see students' ability to share the knowledge that they're gaining in their own ways and in a way that makes sense. I'm gonna pause there. If anybody wants like what's on our minds now when I share that, one of my former colleagues, Kate Roberts, used to say, what are you on about? If anybody wants to unmute themselves and be brave right now, does that, or you can type in the chat, is there anything that comes to mind as I share that you're just like, man, I didn't realize that, or this would be good to know? Any?
I have a question for you, Megan. I'm Marilyn. I teach 7th and 8th grade science. So a lot of times, like you're talking informational text,
yeah.
When the kids read some things, I have them do outlines.
Yeah.
So does that follow from your younger grades where they're picking things out?
Yeah. So how great is that, Marilyn? Like now to know that like that is a huge part of the writing units. Like even down to kinder and first, they make a plan for how their pages are going to go. So when you talk to them about outlines, to say, you've done this before, it might not have been the outline that we're making now. You might not have followed the structure that I'm giving you. But when you made a plan for your writing, that is very similar to the outline I'm asking you to do. Versus I think sometimes when we say outline, myself included, they're like, wait, I've never learned that before. Or it feels like this big foreign thing when it's not really. Does that help, Marilyn?
Yeah, because a lot of times the kids will tell me they never learned how to do an outline.
Yeah. And don't worry, I'm going to give us practical to remind them that they do. So stick with me for a little bit, because by the end of the day, you'll be like, oh, I know how to show them that they know these things. Other things that we're thinking, that was perfect, Marilyn. Yeah. Yes, we do outlines in K. Yeah. They literally plan their pages. Same thing. I mean, I think, you know, even I look at this, like the 4th grade unit, it's interesting because the 4th grade unit called Bringing History to Life is about the American Revolution. Like that's what kids are writing about. And I even think that, like, honestly, if you were to ask Lucy, she would say that's a regret she has, is to make that 4th and 5th grade unit about certain topics, because teachers start to get obsessed over those topics. But it's not meant to be, let me teach you the American Revolution. It's let me teach you how, if you learn something and become the expert on it, how can you put it on the page? And it becomes really powerful. Even thinking, we'll look at this in a little bit, but like social studies, science teachers, math teachers, I bet you try and have your kids, you're like, say more or explain your thinking is probably a term we use a lot. Explain why you would do that. Writing teachers out there, do we teach them to explain their thinking? Do we give them strategies so that they don't just put a bunch of facts on the page? Yes, yes, yes. In my math days, it's funny as I look at this, and then we can feel free to either unmute if you're dying to share something, or put in the chat. This is what I do when it's like awkward. Who knew, like in this day and age, right? We're all in our little spaces. I'll just fill the space for a second. When I think about my teaching, I was a math teacher in addition to a reading and writing. We had a weird split. I taught in Winnetka, and we were ELA, and then you either did math or science, and I did math. And every week my students would do a problem of the week. And they would write these problem of the week explanations for math, and then they would turn it in. And I never once looked at those as a writing teacher. Now, the goal for me was to find out about their math skills, and I wanted to look for the answer. But here in writing, I was teaching kids to like write with sections and organization. And now I look back on that, and I would spend days and days trying to correct these problem of the weeks because kids just rambled. And it was just straight down the page, and they were so hard to grade because it was literally just a ramble. And now I look back on that, I'm like, duh, Megan, like, why weren't you having them organize their writing so that it made your life easier, but also made them more able to clearly understand their thinking or explain their thinking? Beautiful. Oh, beautiful. That's awesome. I love that, Jessica. Thanks for sharing that with me. That is perfect. Oh, you guys are, yes, I love that. That would be what I would suggest. That's amazing. I love it. I should let you take over. Jessica, you want to take over? No, I'm kidding. I won't make you do that. But I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Spot on. Feel free to keep talking back to each other as we're going to segue into one more thing. You guys are being awesome. We're going to do one more quick thing, and then we will process really quickly in those random breakout rooms, and then we'll move into some grade teamwork, okay? So you're like, well, Megan, that's the units of study. I don't teach the units of study. I don't have a copy of them, or I do, but like in this unit, how can I carry things through in other areas? And even how can I better understand if I'm a 3rd grade teacher, yeah, I know that they had lab reports and I know they have Bringing History to Life, but when I'm working with kids live and in person, how do I know what skills come before and what skills come after? So this is the content of the unit, but let's go back to what I had said before, is that when we define workshop, We are talking about giving kids time and space to write or to practice while moving them along their progression of learning. Because as I said before, I forget who I called out as my example, whoever your grade level is teaching this, but that doesn't mean that you don't need this or this. And that's even true in content areas. I'm looking at you again, Marilyn, just because you're below me on the screen and you just shared, you have kids who are in science who are ready to like take it and run with it. And you've got kids where I'm like, I just need to get you to show up to school today. I just need us to like understand one thing. So in all of our teaching, a progression is really hard. Specifically for writing, I wish I could give you a tool for everything, but for writing, we're gonna look closely at a tool that can help us help them in knowing or help us help them move them along, move themselves, us move them, sorry, I'm not saying that right, along a progression of learning. So I'm gonna just real briefly, and just, this would be where Elizabeth shared a file with you all, where it had some progressions in it. And that's what I'm going to be talking through real briefly right now. So this would be the time where you might want to access that. If you do teach writing, this would be a time where you might pull out, if you have it. If you don't, that's okay, because it's in the file. But we're going to be talking through a resource that's a part of the units of study called Writing Pathways right now, and just naming it so you know where it's at. People who are in different content areas, this is a tool or a resource I would want us to all have in our hands, because you'll see why in a second. But I think it will give us all some ideas of making our lives easier. I just wanted to name out what that is. If you guys have questions about where to access it, the folder that Elizabeth shared, Elizabeth is on here, and you can chat her up in the chat box. Does that, or go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yeah, so just as a reminder, it's in, you can go shared with me, the staff folder 2021 curriculum resources. And then it's called Writing Across the Curriculum. And then we're going to be looking at the informational writing folder.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'll give you guys a second if you want to pull that up just so that you have it. Perfect. Just take a second and grab that.
Thank you, Erin. That's very helpful.
I wasn't sure if the hyperlink would work.
It works.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Elizabeth sent me a text. That's what I was reading right now. We're good. I'm sorry. I'm looking at that now. I saw it. We're good. Okay. It wasn't about all of you. Well, it was, but it was just making sure we use our breakout time efficiently when we go to great teams. So now you have access to that. Let me just explain what it is. It's a lot of words on a page to start with. It's a lot of like, this is crazy. I'm not sure where to even begin, especially if I haven't taught writing. Even those of us who have taught writing, a lot of times we're like, just take me back to my unit. Even the unit can be cumbersome and wordy, but when we look at that progression, there's a lot there. So let me break it down for you. This Writing Pathways book was a book that was written with the units of study through the Reading and Writing Project, but it was not Lucy coming up with what should be taught across grade levels. I was actually a part of the creation of it. It was sitting down and looking at standards. It was right after Common Core had come out, but it was also just looking at standards across states and coupling that with what do we need writers to have? What are the things that we want all writers to have at different grade levels? And literally sitting down across K-9, what are those things in the different major genres that we want to expose kids to? And that's where this book and these tools stemmed out of. It is not a resource for content. Our units are the resource for content. The units are the resource for like the unit that you'll teach. This is a resource for the skills taught within that content. It's a perfect resource for access and differentiation. I feel like a buzzword in education, mark my word, that's going to start happening next year is this word called acceleration. I'm not sure if anybody has heard this yet, but it is post-pandemic. People are talking about next year how to differentiate more, especially in the places where kids have not been in school, and they're using this word acceleration to try and get kids up to speed. And so this will be a great resource for acceleration. That said, it's a lot, so I'm going to show you some of the tricks to it. When you look at the back of, and this is not what you have in the file, but those of you who do have it, I'm just going to show really quick. And then you do have some of these things in the file, so just stick with me for a second. In the back, there's 3 tabs, and this is important because even in the file Elizabeth shared, what we look at today is going to be replicated 2 other times. One for opinion writing, one for narrative writing. So we're going to look at information writing, but it exists in an opinion form and in a narrative form as well, okay? And there's going to be 3 major things today that we're going to look at. The thing we're going to spend the most time looking at is looking at the learning progressions for information writing. And this is literally, and we're going to do some of this together. We're going to this is why I put this on here. We're going to break it out and kind of make sense of it in our own words. I call it unpacking it at our different grade levels. Now, when you look at this, there's so much on here, but you look and it goes across pre-K. The book I'm looking at goes across pre-K to 6. The middle school book, if you have it in your units, it looks purple and it goes grades 3 to 8. And then there's even a standalone version that goes K to 9. So there is no shortage of resources. If you have kids who say, I'm done, I have nothing else to work on, just open this book and you're like, actually, there's a lot of things we could work on, okay? So know that first. That's just kind of a roadmap of what the progressions are. I'm gonna make more sense of it shortly. The second tool, so that's the first one, to just show you that, we're gonna make sense of it. The second tool that you'll see a lot and that we want kids to be using across content areas is a checklist. Now the checklist is just one splice of the progression. So they're the exact same thing, but, well, not exact, but nearly the exact same thing. This is one part of what you'll find right here, okay? But written in more student-friendly terms, albeit still a little bit wordy, but there's a lot that we need to teach kids. And I'm gonna help us this afternoon think about how to better use checklists with kids. And then last but not least, this is one that people don't know exists a lot, but even Marilyn, this isn't for the organization piece, but when you were saying that, I'm like, how do we show kids what they've learned before? Like, how do we remind them that, like, you have actually done this before? This is not brand new. And these resources might be a way to do that. It's not the only one, but it just, like, it came to mind when you were talking earlier. In the back of, or another resource, so you've got progressions, you've got checklists, but for whoever it was, I wrote down your name, sorry, so I could remember, Megan. Megan had said, I should remember that. Megan had said that writing isn't really concrete and that's what makes writing difficult. And even when you look at this checklist or progression, if it says, I wrote an ending, I wrote a beginning which got my readers ready to learn. You're like, what the heck does that mean? What the heck does that look like? We can look at this checklist, but at the end of the day, it's not 2 + 2 = 4. So the third favorite resource in this book, and we can get digital access to this. So I can help us for or for content area teachers, if something like this would be interesting to you, I can make sure we get access. But what's so cool here is that one of my former colleagues for each genre has the same person, an adult, I want to be very clear with that, has gone through one topic and written that topic up the progression. So it's bulldogs are fat, that's kindergarten. We've got right here, broken into sections, 1st grade, bulldogs are the best kind of dog. 2nd grade, I'm gonna tell you everything you need to know about bulldogs. We'll move ahead, 4th grade, imagine an animal who is brave enough to fight a bull, but who is very, very gentle. And then it has even more sections and quotes. We could keep going. We could look at 6th grade right here. We move into the introduction of the bulldog. The English bulldog is considered a compact dog, which means it's a short, smooth coat. So you go with the same topic, bulldogs, and you can look at bulldogs from a kindergarten level to a 6th grade level. So it's a really nice resource. It's a nice resource for you as teachers. It's a nice resource to make sense of these progressions, it's a nice resource to compare and contrast student work to. I actually find it to be a nice resource for parents when they say, is my student at grade level? Is my student doing what they're supposed to be doing? I'm not going to show and compare them to their peers, but I might say, let me just show you a sample of writing that's written to match the standards for this particular grade level. Okay, does that make sense? So these, to me, these are gold, because when you teach students to use this, or even when I look at this, I'm like, I don't know what that means. I don't know what it means to hook the reader. I don't know what it means to explain different aspects of a subject. So if I go here and I say, I'm not sure what that means, I look up to grade 5 and I'm like, okay, well, let me just look at that grade 5 sample. And then I flip back here, or I can open it online. And then I say like, oh, let me just read and see what it might mean to explain different things. Okay. And then I look and I have some conversations around that. So these 3 resources are my favorite resources inside of Writing Pathways, and ones that I think we can be using across content areas. One more quick thing before we do some practicing, and then I feel like for some of you, this really doesn't apply, but for a lot of us, most of us on here, I think we could think about how these skills might help us even when we're having them write science reports or having them write a history report or whatever. The other big thing that I want to point out, there's a lot on here. It is hard to understand everything that is on here. You're like, my head is spinning just looking at it. Mine is too. I'll get the screen off for a second. Gives us a headache to just even see what's right there. So if you can look at it instead of this big, huge thing in certain parts, it's gonna make more sense. Here's the trick. When I look at any of the checklists or the progressions, you'll see 3 sections, okay? And I call them 3 buckets. As teachers of writing, or teachers who have kids write, there's 3 things that they can work on. They can work on how the piece is built, how it's structured. They can work on what they put inside that building, the words that they add to it, how it's developed, how they explain their thinking, how they explain their thoughts, and then they can work on, or in addition to working on, language conventions. So in any of our subject areas, there's how it's going to go, what you're going to fill in those parts, and then let's work on our grammar and our conventions, okay? So when you look at these resources, I'm going to show you guys a slide. Instead of looking at it as one big headache, I look at it in buckets. And I say to myself, okay, so I'm going to look at this learning progression. I'm kind of in my screen and on your slide, and there's a lot here. But let me think of like the bucket of structure. And my 4th graders are going to structure their piece by working on a lead and an ending, by working on the transitions in between, and by working on a plan for organization. And that's what you were talking about earlier as you were talking, Marilyn. That's their organization. That's how it's going to go. And then I think my development. How am I going to like build? How are they going to fill that? How are they going to fill that outline? The outline only goes so far. And that's where you work on your development and your elaboration and your craft. Elaboration being how you say more, and craft being the words that you use. And then last but not least, we work on our conventions, on our spelling and our punctuation and our grammar. So when you talk to kids about their writing in any subject area, and when we unpack this tool, let's think structure. How is it built? Lead, ending, transitions, organization. Let's think about development. What's all the stuff that goes in there? Elaboration and how we say more, and craft being the word choice that we use, the voice that we use. And then last but not least, our language conventions, our spelling and our punctuation. So I share this language with you because if I am a content area teacher, or if I'm a teacher in a certain grade level and I'm teaching a problem of the week or having students do a problem of the week, I might say, let's work on your structure by making an outline. Let's work on your development by explaining your thinking. Let's work on your conventions by working on your spelling or your punctuation. And if we can start to have common language across our school, I'm not saying you might not also use synonyms, but you're going to have students who more likely carry learning from one place to the next and one grade to the next because they're going to be familiar with structure, how it's built, development, the stuff that fills it, and conventions, our spelling and our punctuation. That makes sense to you guys? Yay? Is that helpful? So then when I'm looking at this progression, it gets a lot more manageable. So today, we are going to have an opportunity to unpack or get to know these progressions in grade teams. And when we're in grade teams, we might decide that we want to, I'm going to give you kind of a protocol for how to do this. In terms of getting to know it, we might do it all together at first and then break into individual grade teams. We'll figure that out here in a second. But when it comes to getting to know these progressions, I'm just going to talk you through, I think I would say, I wouldn't say obvious, but I'm going to talk you through Megan's steps that I think are pretty practical for how to get to know the progressions. So when I get to know, and stick with me for like 3 more minutes, I think we're spot on with time. I know this gets to be kind of a lot. I can always tell when like our mind is full, I'm bubbling over. We're going to think just how could we unpack this? How can I get to know this and make sense of this and have some conversations with my colleagues? At the end of the day, the best way to get to know it is to start using them with kids. You can't memorize everything that's on there, but if you can give yourself a little prep like we're going to do today, it'll go a long way. So if you read the grade level, if you look for important words, you say it back, you go down, you go up, and you talk across, it'll help us make sense of it. That's a lot of jargon, so let's just practice it and let me show you how this would go, okay? How I found that it best goes in the different PD since these resources came out that I've done. So the first step we're going to do is we're going to read, let's just look at our grade level or a grade level or the middle grade level. And I know we're a huge range right now, so I just tried to, quite frankly, pull kind of from the middle. So this is going to be 3, 4, and 5. But I purposely pictured or pulled areas that we might not be looking at in our breakout sessions. So let's focus on our lead, and let's remember our lead helps us in the structure bucket. Okay, so if I'm going to work on my structure by working on how I'm going to start it, let me start with the middle grade level. I'm just going to go ahead and read it. The writer hooked her readers by explaining why a subject mattered, telling a surprising fact, or giving a big picture. She let readers know that she would teach them different things about a subject. Okay. There's a lot here. Kinder teachers, first grade teachers are going to have this easier because there's less in yours. So I'm going to look here. The writer hooked. Okay, so like hooked readers, explained why subject matters. See how I'm like kind of circling or underlining, surprising fact, big picture, teach them different things. Okay, so if I wanted to say back in my own words, I know I'm not going to use the word hooked. I'm just going to say get readers attention. Again, this is in Megan's words, making sense of Lucy's words. And then I'm going to say why subject matters. They have to say why. Under this fact, big pick. And then last but not least, preview. That word's not in here, but I like it. Different parts. Because I think that's like, let readers know she was going to teach them. So I think at a 4th grade level, I need to write an information lead that gets their attention, that lets them know why something matters, and that gives a little preview of how the parts are going to go. Does that sound okay to you guys? Would you say the same thing? Okay, now I'm going to go down a level. You can do it with me as I read it. Think keywords. If you have your own copy in front of you, you could be doing this too. The writer wrote a beginning in which she got readers ready to learn. Okay, we're down in 3rd about a subject. Okay. Information. So they have a start. They have some sort of beginning or intro. I'm going to use word preview, learning, basic info about subject. It's not perfect, it's in my own terms, but it feels to me like those are the main things. Now, again, if this feels kind of subjective and not really concrete, what can I do? I can flip here and I can say, let me just look at that lead and let me get a better idea of what they need. And then I go up. Then I go up one grade level and I say the writer wrote an introduction which he helps get readers interested and understand. Let readers know subtopics later develop, as well as the sequence. Okay, so readers' interest, you guys get the idea. Preview, and they're gonna use the word subtopics now. Hint at even organization. So now if I were to talk across this, I might say, okay, well, there's different levels of a lead. And if a student's writing at the 3rd grade level, and this is gonna be me trying to not just read off my notes, but say it back. If the students are working at a 3rd grade level, they just need a beginning. And they need a beginning that's gonna let the reader know what they're learning about. Versus when they move to 4th grade, now that they have a beginning that names their topic, they have to start to do a little bit of previewing some of the subtopics. Also in 4th grade is where students will start to do surprising facts and big picture. They might have some of those kitschy little hooks at the beginning of their writing. When they move into 5th grade, it becomes less about the kitschy hooks. It becomes less about those surprising facts and big picture, and more about a lead that truly gets readers' interest around a topic by previewing the subtopic and what readers can expect for how the piece will go. You guys see how I just did that? So I thought to myself, like, what's my grade level? What comes before? What comes after? And then from there, I can start to think practical implications for my units or even my content areas, okay? So it takes a little bit of time, but today we're gonna have some time in grade teams. It's not about us all marking our things up and having it all, you know, all of our bullet points, but let's take some time together today to really process and make sense of this information on our own. And the reason why I say that is because sometimes when I've done this, everybody's like, wait, what are the bullet points? What do I need to do? I'm like, it's not about the bullet point. I mean, it is, but like my bullet points might be different than Dennis's, which might be different than Lizzie's. It's just about us spending some time today, really getting to know what's at my grade level, what comes before, what comes after, and let's have some conversations across K2, 3, 5, 6, 8 around what are the information writing skills that we want kids to have, or if we need to differentiate, what are the information writing skills that I'm going to be able to talk across? Does that make sense to everybody? Yes. Nothing like asking that question and then answering that question. I should say this: if we have questions, wonderings, thoughts, chat amongst yourself or add those. You can send some of those questions to me in the chat right now if you have some just big questions about these resources and tools. And then I'm going to set us up for our afternoon, where we're gonna, not even afternoon, we're only at 9:30. We're gonna take a little break, but for our breakouts, I'm gonna set us up to just or to continue this work, I guess, if you will, with each other, okay? Again, if we have questions, please feel free to chime in with those now. So the idea was, when we planned this day, and we were thinking about information writing skills that we feel would be good for the whole community to know, and for if I teach the units of study, how can I help us get to know some of our resources better? If I teach content area, how can we carry it through? How can we have cross grade level vertical conversations? And so we thought about 3 major things. I did this together with your team. So as much as it seems like a Megan agenda, it was something that we did together as a team. And it's a link to what I'm gonna share now is on the Padlet, I believe. Let me double check that right now. Hang on. I think I put it up there. Oh, no, hang on a second. I'm gonna put a link to it. Hang on. I'm gonna put a link to it in the share instead, and then I will add it to the Padlet. Copy link. Hang on a second. Sorry, guys. Okay, now where are you at? There we go. Okay, so in the chat, now I'll put a link to a doc. It's gonna be a doc I'm gonna show you right now. And on this doc, it's gonna walk you through different steps or different phases during our grade band time. And again, we're going to open the breakout rooms so that you're with people across grade levels. One of the reasons why we're doing that is because I'm going to spend certain amounts of time with certain grade levels, and it's easier to have us in 3 chunks instead of in 8 different chunks. And I think it's also an opportunity for us to have conversations across bands. So when we are in those work sessions, if you will, there's 3 things that would be the goal for where we can end today. And I tried to put them in order of importance. I'll let you know after I go through this, how much time we're going to have and how that might look. So the 3 different phases, I called them, I wasn't sure what else to call them, so I called them phases, are as follows. Phase 1 is going to be really getting to know the content for your grade level, not the units, AKA unpacking these progressions. That word unpacking, I feel like is kind of cliche, but you know what I mean. Just getting to know what kids are supposed to be able to do as information writers. To your point earlier, Marilyn, you didn't know I was going to pick on you. Sorry, you're just the one on my screen. And since you brought it up, it'd be good for you to know what they were supposed to do before, or what comes after, so you can hold them accountable to that. So that's step 1, is to just have some conversation around those progressions. Now, I picked for you, though this is open for debate, but I tried to pick 1 from the development bucket and 1 from the structure bucket. And I tried to pick the 2 that to me are the heaviest hitters, and the 2 strands that I feel make the most sense across all areas of our day. So that's why I chose, or in giving the suggestion that you spend time unpacking elaboration and spend some time unpacking, if you will, organization. I just think that in my experience, these are the 2 that lead to the best conversations and give us the more practical implications for how we can support information writing and students' integration of knowledge across subject areas, across our days, okay? Then after that, at the bottom, I gave some suggestions. If you have time, you could always look at some of the student writing samples. We didn't do that today. I didn't point them out, but in Pathways, there's also student writing samples. These are not by an adult, these are by kids. So they won't be a perfect match to the checklist or the progression, but it is interesting to just kind of look through them. They are not published pieces. They are pieces that kids wrote, what we say, on demand. So they were written kind of right at the end of a unit. Let me show you your skills. So if you want to go there, and I'll be around to help, but if you want to go there, you could spend a little bit of time looking at that. You could also just have a brief discussion, and we're going to talk about this more this afternoon, but how do you see yourself using some of these tools or using what you do during this unpacking in your upcoming instruction? Just a brief conversation around that. So that's phase 1. And then phase 2 is really digging into, okay, now let's plan. And this might be where even if you have to kind of spin off into different shared docs, or if you need me to open extra breakouts and you're like, send me a message and you're like, Megan, 6th grade just wants to work together right now, or whatever, we can do that then. During the second phase, this is where we're really going to be looking at our content areas, or our the implications this has across our day, not just in writing workshop, but like how can we plan instruction across our day. So take a peek at that. It'll guide you through it. Again, I tried to be pretty black and white for steps, not to be the one to tell you what to do, but I just know that guidance sometimes is helpful. And then my final phase right here is to just think about the discussion of additional instructional implications. So this is really going back to what we talked about this morning and thinking about more about, I keep saying this morning as if it's not still morning, but talking more about this and talking more about this. So that would be the 3rd phase that you will get to. We are going to do more work together when we come back around how to use some of these tools practically across content areas. We'll also be talking a little bit more about this here when we come back. Just a couple housekeeping things, and we are going to take a break before we go into these things, or these breakout rooms. You're gonna have about, I did the math before and now I'm off. You'll have about ish. We have until right now 11. Lunch will be 11:15 to 12:15. So we have from right now, we'll take a 10-15 minute break. When we come back, we'll be in breakouts. And then we'll have a 10 to 15 minute, or then from there we'll have like an hour and a half, I guess, maybe just under, where you're gonna 90 minutes where you're gonna be able to work together around these things. When we come back from lunch, you're gonna have another hour. So you've got a pretty good chunk of time. However, during that time during that time, we planned very specifically times that I can be coming to each group to add a little specific to your grade team to help you target. I have like bullet points of some extra things to consider for K2, for 3-5, and for 6-8. And so we put that on the schedule as well. And then this afternoon, same thing, I'll be popping around. So if you have questions or wonderings or things that you think are worth us talking about as a grade team, that would be the time to do that. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? This is meant to be as useful for you as possible. The more conversations we can have, the better, and not just conversations, like dig into some planning, maybe even start to think, where are some of these tools? How do I print them off? I can help us with all of that. But I think if we start with the content, it's gonna make a lot more sense for the practical implications. Okay, does that sound good to everybody? Perfect. So let's do this. We're going to take, we're 10 minutes off. So we're just going to do everything 10 minutes late, except for lunch. We'll keep that the same. Okay. And then I'll shave off a few minutes with each group when I pop around, because I'm going to be starting with, I'm going to start with 6-8, then move to 3-5, then move to K2. If you need me along the time or along that, or want to ask questions, between myself and Elizabeth and Sheridan and everybody who's on here, we can make sure things get tackled. So just use that chat box and do what we need to do. Does that sound we good? Okay. So as we get up to take a break, I am going to create the breakout rooms. I will pull everybody back here right before lunch, just because I think it's good to kind of pull back, reset. We'll have lunch. We'll come back all together, and then I'll send you out, just as a way to kind of, if there's things we need to tackle or address as a whole group, we can then, or things that are coming up in your breakout rooms, we can talk about it then. So you'll have, let's give it 15 minutes that will come back. So it's 9:41, 51, let me do my math, 56, let's call it that. Take your 15 minutes, grab your coffee, and then when we come back, at 9:56 or 10 o'clock, we'll be in our breakout teams until 11:15, and I'll start with 6-8, move to 3-5, and then move to K2. Sound good? Awesome. Okay, thank you guys. If we have questions, jot them down. I'll be around during the chats to share some of that, or things you want us to tackle, put that in there now. And Elizabeth, I'm gonna now create some of those breakouts. I'm gonna look at my text that you were sending and make sure that I get the right people in the right place.
Yeah, just let me know.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna do. Bill, Andrew, Mike, and Bree. Mhm. Okay. Elizabeth, are you there? You should go.
Can I help you with something?
Oh, no, it's okay. I was just going to ask Elizabeth, no, I was going to ask her thoughts. Well, and you can tell me your thoughts. The K2 group, now that I'm putting people in there, is really big. So I was just, we were better to do, and maybe.
Is it better to split up kindergarten? That's 6 teachers, Megan?
That was just my thought. I wonder that might make more sense, and I'm happy to split up in any way we can, or whatever you guys think would be best.
Erin, you'd have, in 1-2, you'd have 8 teachers, correct?
2, 4, 6, 8. Yes.
Okay. And then there would be 6 in kindergarten. So that's a pretty big group.
Let's do that. And then people can let me know if for even the 3-5 group, if they would prefer to be with just their grade team after things get started. We can always easily create more. Does that sound okay? Okay.
Can I help you with that at all?
No, we're good. I'm just awkwardly looking into my screen as we're doing that.
Reminds me of open house. I'm just going to talk while you're doing that because it can be mindless, because I am the host of the big account on the school.
Yeah.
And we had this massive open house with like 180 people. And I pre-assigned the rooms.
Yeah.
But there's a little funky little thing that if the people jumping onto the Zoom don't have your OSM school account, which is all of the families attending open house.
Oh my gosh.
It undoes all of the breakout rooms when you open. And so,
oh my gosh.
And I don't even know these people. And a lot of them had not used Zoom. So you couldn't even go on, like I loved what you did today, where you said to people, rename yourself with the grade level first.
Yes.
So many people had never used Zoom. So it was definitely my learning.
It's so hard. And then you feel like, oh my gosh, that you start sweating, the pressure's on, everybody's
pressure is on,
looking at you, and you can't. I will say Zoom is easier than Google Meet is
totally.
very hard. But and then you feel like, okay, am I moving this person to the right place?
Right.
It helps to have them do their. Who knew that this would be a thing, right? That you'd be number one doing go back to school night on Zoom, and number two that we'd be like.
We actually loved it because it was quick. Everybody was at home.
Yeah, you probably had better attendance.
We had a blizzard, so we wouldn't have ended up getting all those families or staff there. So,
oh my gosh, it's perfect. Well, and you probably have good attendance, anyways. But I just mean if there's 2 parents, or if there's I feel like it just. If you're at home, somebody usually has to stay with the kids or do that. It just makes it nice that they can both be there. Perfect. Okay, we're good then. I'm trying. Elizabeth sent me 2. We're going to put the specialists. It's Bree, Bill, Mike, and Andrew, right? The 4 of them would make sense.
Andrew,
There's also
Mike,
Emma.
I think Emma
and Emma
be with middle school.
Emma. Yeah, Emma's going
well,
to
we all
school.
requested to be with middle school.
Bree, I think we made some assignments for the first part, and then we're changing it.
Okay.
So, okay, we're good. I think I did the right thing then, Elizabeth. I followed your text.
Okay, and we can move people if.
Yes, I'll keep an eye on the chat so people can. And feel that I've got my phone out, so feel free to keep texting if that's easiest. Perfect. And please, anybody who's on, I was going to say Diana and Elizabeth, but anybody who's on, feel free to. There's things we need to do differently. things that are coming up, just let me know.
Megan, I think my one question about kindergarten, because I think that's good to have the 6 of them together, is will there be an opportunity for them to then talk with 1, 2?
Why don't, well, yes, because I'm, for the, I will pull them back there. I will pull them back when we do the K2. So I'm going to break, and actually I need to fix my timing right now. Cause I planned a little thing for each, for 6, 8, 3, 5, and K2. So I'll pull them together back into that room. Thank you for that reminder. Diana, okay, let's see here. I'm just gonna work on my timing. So we're gonna do more like 10 to 10, 20, 10, 20 to 10. 10, 25 to 10. 50, 10, 50. Okay, I'm gonna put that in the chat right now for people. Okay. Perfect. Great. I'm gonna go fill up my coffee just really quick before we come back on. Then I'll open them right when we come back. Sheridan, do you have a preference if you're with, or I can bounce around? Just go ahead and send me a message if you want me to move you around. Do you have preference? The first, second, or 3, 5?
I'd like to go to both. Could I start with 3, 5 and then go to?
Perfect. Yep. And you just let me know, or you let me know. Either send me a message or send me a text, and I'll move you whenever.
Perfect.
That's great. And then I'll make sure you come with me for those 2 when we do. Great. Okay. Okay. The 3, 5 group is kind of a big group, Sheridan. So even if we, like when they start together, when you're with them, after I check in with them or something, if we need to break into smaller groups, just let them know that when you're with them, if you want to. Okay. Okay. Okay, I think we're good. I'm gonna give it just a second. I haven't opened the breakout rooms if people are back yet. I was just gonna name a couple quick things. I'll stop rambling. If you're sitting at your computer, double flash your mute button. So I see that you're there before I start rambling. I'll give it a sec. We're good. Kinder, just a couple of things. Kinder, we decided that the group was pretty big for the K2 group. So I moved Kinder teachers to their own breakout room to start the conversations. When I meet with certain groups, I put the times in the chat. I'll just pull you together. Means that I'll be kind of moving people, Houdiniing from one place to the next. But I'll just try to be flexible. We can all be flexible with that as best we can. Same thing like 3-5, it's a big group. 6-8, I'm going to start with you so we can decide what to do after that. But if you need to move anywhere or need me to move you anywhere, I will do my best, like I said, to keep an eye on that chat. And so you can let me know and we can figure things out from there. Does that sound good to everybody? Okay, there was one more. I was going to ask about one more person. Janeth, you just added yours. Let's see. Okay. Liam, not to call somebody out, but calling out, where are you? When you pop back on, it probably changed your, where does anybody know where Liam would be?
Middle school.
Middle school. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Great. And thanks for being flexible, you guys. We'll be as flexible as we need to be. Perfect. Thank you. As we do that. And Bree Elizabeth with 5, was that what you said?
Is that right, Diana?
Yeah.
Okay.
5.
Perfect. Okay. As we just kind of stressing one final thing, as we have these conversations, just remember that this is our chance to really talk about the alignment of skills that we want across our school, across our buildings, and using this tool as a vehicle to help us do that. But the more we can dig into having those conversations of what information writing experiences do you guys want for the kids at OSM, the better. I'm excited to hear your conversations, hear about them. I'm going to open the breakout rooms. Let me know if you have questions. Like I said, I'll pull us all back together just for a quick thing before lunch, and then we'll have lunch and we'll go from there. Okay. Breakout rooms are open. Diana, do you want to just hang here?
I was hoping to go wherever you're going.
Oh, perfect. I'll just bring you with me.
And if you can take Sue, do you see Sue? Oh, she went to 3-5. Perfect. Yeah. Can I just follow you?
Yeah, that's great. And leave Sue in 3-5?
I think, yeah, she's in 3-5. She's the new math coach.
Oh, great.
So,
okay.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Great. Thank you.
Yep, of course.
Oh, okay. And we can make changes to it as needed. That third column, we can kind of hold off on that until I think when we're doing more planning later in the day. So we can kind of focus on those first 2 columns with unpacking the progression. And I just want to emphasize, I know that there was a lot of mention from Megan that maybe sounds a lot like Lucy Calkins to many of us, and it is inspired by what she outlined through the Writers' Workshop model. But just reminder, this is not a Lucy Calkins focused PD. It's really about how do we use that workshop model of teaching in every subject, the direct instruction, the practice, the feedback, the community learning environment. And what does that look in terms of how we are incorporating informational writing in science and math, etc.
That's perfect, Elizabeth. Yeah. And I want us to make sense of that now, even just with our time together. I make mention of it because and that's why, even as I went through those units, and I hesitated doing that because I think that like exemplifies that it feels like a unit of study training, but I just think it's, regardless of what program you use, it's very eye-opening. Like, I'm laughing, Marilyn. You're like, I'm never going to share again because now she keeps calling on me. But even Marilyn, when you had that aha of like, whoa, they've done outlines before, or they've done lab reports before, or they've done history writing before. I think regardless of what, and this is what's nice about my job now, I work with a lot of schools that don't follow the units of study, and regardless of what program you use, it's just having conversations across K-8 of whatever program we use, how can we best help kids learn across a series of grade levels instead of this individual grade level. And I feel like sometimes teachers feel, myself included, like that's taking our autonomy. I remember when I worked in Winnetka, and that was the first feedback to getting the units. Stop taking our autonomy. Stop telling us what we need to teach. And I think, yes, I get that. And I want us to all have the flexibility to bring ourselves to our teaching. But I also think it's really important for kids to see connections across classrooms and across grade levels so that it doesn't feel like each year I'm having to start fresh. Like each year it's a new way to memorize. And then no wonder they have a hard time making their outlines because they're not making a connection. I'm just using that as an example. They're not making the connection to what they had done before. So it feels like all of us are always kind of starting fresh.
I had a question on that. So my thought is, does every teacher use the same terminology? So that way the kids get to connect it. So when I called an outline, what are they calling it in the younger grade?
That is why we are here. That is like the hope of what we're gonna like have some conversations around that together. And honestly, Marilyn, like that's, and all of us, that's why using some, I don't care whether it's this or something else, but having some sort of shared tool or resource that we can refer to can help. Because I can sit here and give you the language. In kindergarten, they say make a plan. They talk about organizing their parts from there. And after they organize their parts, they talk about their sections. And then they talk about, so it's very much so when they generate ideas, they're planning for how their writing will go. Obviously that segues then into, they use the term outline in starting in the 5th grade units, make an outline of how this will go. But I think it's, I can't sit here all day, every day and be like, here's the terminology for all these things. So knowing that there's a place to go and us having some of those conversations together today, I think can be helpful. Mark,
I think about how powerful it would be too, though, for our kids to be able to hear that John is using the same language, right, that Mary Carol's using, and they're talking about writing in the same way, or Mike Kay when he's doing a health unit, or Emma in art, that if everybody was talking about writing in the same way, imagine how powerful that is for kids to see that.
And it takes time.
Exactly. I'm particularly interested how things progress from grade to grade. Because I may be working with an 8th grader who currently writes at a 4th grade level.
Yep.
So.
Yep. It's interesting that you say that, Mark. And I have a couple of things for us to chime in, and then I want this time to like for us, and we can. These are the conversations we can keep having. I was with a high school. Where was? Wisconsin. This summer, and I was working with some high school teachers around writing, and they just kept saying to me, some of them were special ed teachers, and they're like, but our kids come in not being able to write anything. And I was like, well, can they put words on the page? And I know there's some kids that can't, and they're like, well, yeah, but they can't write anything. And I'm like, okay, well, it's knowing what you mean by that. Like, what's the step before yours? What's the step before that? What's the step before that?
Exactly.
And that's where I think having a bank or a place to go to. I mean, for me, when I'll work with K-12. I don't know everything that everybody's supposed to have, but using something can be helpful.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any other like things we want to throw out there real quick before I've got a couple of things I wanted to say to get us thinking, and then we can start to do some unpacking together. But any other major things that
This is just kind of to say out loud so that we can maybe get to it eventually today, is I know that some teachers outside of ELA have already started incorporating the power paragraph model in the rubric. I think it'd be really great to just all get on the same page of this is the rubric that we use for 6, for 7, for 8. And then I know like in ELA, we have to tweak it for, are you writing an argumentative power paragraph or are you writing to explain this is the main idea because, and I know that like, obviously they do informational writing in science, in social studies. If there's ever a time when they are doing, for example, and I know it's not our focus today, but argumentative writing, then we have that in the bank as well. And everyone can just quickly find it and utilize that rubric as needed.
And I like that because I know Mira and I were actually just talking about this. It works. Like first week of school, we had kids come up to us in the parking lot and say, my teacher was so impressed with my structure at Jones. You know, like that's the feedback that I take extremely serious. Sometimes, you know, our map scores, they don't look so hot. But when I hear something like that and they're in a, you know, high program, chosen for a high program at Jones, that makes me really happy to know that that is something we need to make sure is happening top down. And somebody just said this week, if I told them to do a power paragraph, would they know what that means? And I was like, yeah, they all know what that means. So I feel like if we can find consistency in doing that in other areas,
yes,
we're in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree. Because I've had a couple students who are freshmen this year at Jones tell me the outlining. Mrs. Kennedy, I'm so glad you made me do outlining because the teacher actually showed my notes to the class, you know, because some kids did not know either how to take notes or how to break the information down from the text or whatever they're working on too.
But Marilyn, I'd love to know, how do you have the kids outline a text in science? Because like Mary Carol and I are having them read research, and we have a process of like, okay, skim, use text features, pull out what's important, put it in your own words. But to be able to use, oh, this is the outline that they use in science.
Well, what it is, it's kind of the old-fashioned outline I learned in high school. And it's, you know, you look at the text first and you look at the big topics that are bolded, and then you look at the subtopics that are put in a different color text but bolded. And I have them do that format first so they can see how the lesson's progressing as far as information. And then they know in the beginning, I do that part for them. And then they go in and pull out the highlights, and we talk about what are highlights and go over it. But then eventually I tell them, I've given you that model of how to set up your chapter lesson with the titles. Now it's your turn. You have to start with that part eventually. And a lot of them groan and are like, oh, do we have to do an outline on this? But I'm just like, yes, you do. Because one, I know then you absolutely are reading the text and getting
because it's good for you.
Yeah. Otherwise, I know you don't even really think you have to read the text if you're not accountable for doing some kind of work with it. But I wanted to ask you guys about, you know, at the beginning, I showed a lot of the ELA teachers the CER format. And so many of you said it was similar to the power paragraph. So it's claim, evidence, and reasoning. So can I still use that with science? Because they asked me, Mrs. Kennedy, is this a CER format? Or do I change it and say, well, it's because I don't want them to think every response is a power paragraph, because I don't need a paragraph for every response.
Do you mind if I chime in real quick? Is that okay? And I know I'm just trying to think of, before I bounce, I'm not being like, you're talking about things that are internal. I'm like, yes. But here's what I'm thinking, even with the power paragraph and the CEA, and they're good at it and they've got it and they've nailed it, and that's going to help them moving forward. I think it goes both, you guys are getting me to think that it goes both ways. It's like, how do we take what they're taught in writing and use that language in content areas, but also how do we take the language that they're good at, that they know, the power paragraph and the CEA, and connect that to some of what they're getting in writing. So I think that too, like, do you know what I mean when it goes both ways? Because it's like sometimes kids will memorize CEA or a power paragraph, and then all of a sudden I give them a checklist that says elaboration, and they're like, wait, what? That's something different. And I'm like, no, that's your reasoning. That's the, like, it's being flexible in your vocabulary so that you know that like claim, evidence, reasoning is the same as this elaboration that I'm looking for inside of your argument writing, inside of your information writing. And so I think you're getting me to think just the importance of, and even today, it sounds like that could be a place that we go. It's what do we have and we know, but then also how does that connect in the other areas? And then the other thing I was thinking, just as you guys were chiming in, I don't mean to like insert myself where maybe it wasn't needed, but I'm thinking two big things. One, you know, are there, like, as you said, Marilyn, when they come in and you're like, the first time I show them how it goes, or I model it for them, how this will go. You shouldn't have to do that by 7th grade if they've been taught writing units, K6, like, I'm not saying that there might not be a little bit of like, you know, Miss Hargrave's style that wants to be added, but like, I think of these units that are taught and I'm like, they should, I was doing it with some 4th grade teachers yesterday where they were literally like helping kids take these essays and they physically manipulate. They have these folders, and in these folders, their folders are basically the outline, but it's like to make it very black and white that you have like A, and in A you put 1, 2, 3, and in B you put 1, 2, 3, and in C, like they've learned that down to so it's helping them carry that so that you could go beyond that, or even just getting them to tap into it. So that was one thing that I wanted, that was just going through my mind. And even if it's, I wonder, we'll talk about this afternoon, but like getting your hands on some of the writing samples from different grade levels to show, say like, I'm just going to show you guys a couple things before we get started in our, you know, science reports. Let me just show you something that I think might look familiar to you from a different grade level. And let's just name out, what do we notice? Or even before you start a science report, or before you start outlining, to say, will you tell me in the past, how have you planned your information writing? I'm gonna be quiet for a few minutes. I want you to just tell me. At first you'll hear crickets, and then you'll be like, think of any information writing assignment that you did last year. I know that you wrote history reports. I know you wrote lab reports. I know you wrote investigative journalism. And again, that's the other reason why I gave you that K cheat sheet, because you can say, I know that you did this the year before. What did you know about organization in that? And that's where the language can help us across groups. So that was the second thing I wanted to say. And then the third thing, when you were saying, Mark, when we were talking about the CEA and we were talking about the power paragraph, and like they say, why do I have to do this? Or why do I have to make the outline? I think attaching that to the purpose, and like which we do, but when I think writing perspective, when we teach writing and when kids do any type of writing in any subject area, and honestly, when you have to write an email to parents or write an email back to your colleagues or plan your lesson for tomorrow, we follow a certain process. First, we generate ideas and we plan. That's how we start. We're like, how is this going to go? What is my idea for what I'm going to put on the page? And we make a plan. And then from there, usually we do some sort of draft. We get some of that plan on the page. And I'm talking through what units of writing we'll teach, but it's true in any of your subject areas. After I have my plan and I get some drafting, it's really important that I look back at that draft. I don't just turn it in, but I look back and I make revisions. I have a new vision for that piece of writing. And that doesn't mean to just edit. That doesn't mean to just add a period or a capital letter. Revision is, you know what, that CEA didn't sound, that reasoning didn't sound very good. Let me try it again. Or in this power paragraph, I think I could have a better, and I don't even know your power paragraphs, but I think I could have a better starter line or whatever. But teaching, like using that language, make a revision to make your claim stronger, make a revision to make, that's what they're doing in writing anyways. And then anytime, whether it's an email to a parent or a presentation or a lesson, I go through it and I make final checks. Sometimes I forget to do this, but this is where I look and I make sure that it looks good before I hit send or before I turn in the assignment. And we could call this celebration, but I like to say publication. It's when we make things public. So I think whether it's a CEA or a power paragraph, and Mark, as you were saying, when we say it's good for you, it's good for them because that's the process that that's how we exist. That's how we think, what am I going to put? We make a plan, we get it out there, we make some revisions and some edits, and we go again. I hope that didn't feel too much agenda heavy or off, but I was thinking of it when you said that, Mark, earlier, and when you guys were talking about even just the outlining. And Marilyn, to your point, if I can even talk about it as how in the past have you planned for an essay? How in the past have you planned for a report? How in the past have you planned for an argument piece? How in the past have you planned for a CEA? I think a lot of times we say, do this CEA response, and some kids are not planning for how it's going to go. They just start responding. I'm like, no. Before you start writing the CEA response, you need to plan. How is it going to go? And so using some of that terminology, I think, could be helpful. Thoughts?
Yep.
Is that helpful? Does that give us some good language that we can be using?
I just added a column on our document as everyone was sharing of like these shared structures and practices. So anyone can feel free to add, but I have outlines, just the writing process as a whole, power paragraph, CER language, written responses, and then Socratic seminars / roundtables.
Nice. I even wonder if it would be good for kids to see, to ask them, when do you outline, when are other areas where you outline or whatever. You guys got it. I feel like you can kind of take it and run from there. But I definitely think, like Elizabeth said, just remembering that it's not the units of study, it's not Lucy. I think it's just more like, what are the skills, and especially like fifth graders moving into sixth or whatever, what are some things that they already know, so that we're not always having to start fresh. Not that it's a bad, nothing is wrong with what has been done. Like, I always think that's interesting about PD, because it makes it sound like there's something that wasn't right about what we were doing. But if there's ways that we can increase student achievement and productivity and integration of knowledge, I think that's always really important. Does that make sense?
Well, thanks. It helps me a lot.
Good.
Because I'm picking up these students brand new, and I don't want to confuse them by using terminology that I used when I was school, and it's completely different than what they're used to. Because that's when I get the shutdown and the blank looks like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't, yeah. And I'll help us in the, I think there's nothing better than show them, here's, oh, look, I got this piece from your fifth grade teacher. Let me show you real quick. What did you learn last year? And having them look at that can be really, really helpful. I also, ELA teachers, and it sounds like you guys are already doing this, but I think you can help reading and writing are things that are going to happen in every content area forever. You can't learn without having that.
Exactly.
So I think even, and I think that's where you guys are even going when you were saying, let's look at our rubrics, Elizabeth, just the more connections you can get kids to make, the better. I've even been thinking, literally, if there's a chart in one of your rooms or a doc you've sent with your rubric for the CEA, and I think this is where you guys are going, already that's helpful to have across the whole grade level. But even if there's other things, if there's a writing sample, if there's something you give them on conventions, a lot of times we give editing checklists, or here's what you need to do when you edit. That should be the same thing across, that should be a shared tool. That shouldn't be something like what Marilyn's looking for in your editing shouldn't be different than what Kathleen is looking for. It shouldn't be different than what Lizzie's looking for, because then they're not taking one skill and moving it to the next. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. I feel like you guys kind of have a plan for what you need to tackle together. I definitely think that looking for some of the language at those progressions could be a nice starting point. And even thinking, are there places in those progressions or checklists where you want to insert some of your power paragraph and CEA language as well? It's not just taking this language and making it a part of your classroom, but what's the language in your classroom that you think should be a part of ELA too? That sound good to you guys? We good? Okay. You've got Elizabeth as your fearless leader down there. So we're good. Did you know that that was your job, Elizabeth? Sorry. So I'm going to jump into, do you guys have any other questions for me or thoughts? We're good. You're like, just leave us alone for a few minutes. We're good. You take this time as a group to just do what you need to do to think about how we can help kids best as writers. And we'll check in with you in a little bit. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Let's see.
Mr. Caruso. I don't think we've had the pleasure. How are you?
Yeah, I don't think so. I'm good. How are you? It's nice to meet you.
And have them look at that specifically.
Our school used to be really focused on something called.
Oh, perfect.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
I am jumping into a group with 3-5, but I just wanted to, for like 15 minutes before I come back to you, I just wanted to do a check-in and see, like, how are we? Are we like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing. Separate first grade and second grade groups. I want to make sure that this time, and we also don't have to like sit and stare at our screens the whole time. When we planned this PD, it was like, do we send people off and just have them come back? Different people had different thoughts. So that's why we're all here, but just, I wanted to check in real quick and see how you guys are doing.
Thank you. I do think we want to just make sure we're doing the right thing.
Okay, awesome.
We were looking at the information writing progressions, comparing, in the document, I don't know if we can share our screen, we can show you what we have. I don't think, you have to.
Oh, do I have to let you? Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Multiple. Okay, go for it. Does that work?
No, it still won't let me.
Advanced sharing options. Oh, because I'm not running the meeting.
No worries. We don't have to share the screen.
That might be something I need to ask Elizabeth to switch, but it would help you guys if you could share the screen, right?
Yeah, because also,
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, Brittany has like the writing progressions book pulled up online too, and she wanted to share it with us. So if we could get that, that'd be great.
I'll ask Elizabeth. Let me text her, but I'll ask her. We might have to sign off of the Zoom call and change it and then sign back on. I'll ask her to change it during lunch. Because right now it's like it looks like a set setting that only the host can share, and I think it's through. I've done this too many times but I think it's through her settings on Zoom, not on the call. Does that make sense?
Got it.
So
no worries.
We'll fix that during lunch.
Not a big deal.
So you guys are looking through the progressions, talking about it.
Right. So we focused. Right now we're looking at the elaboration part. Correct.
Yep. And honestly, you guys can pick which ones. And if you want to do a different genre, that works too. Like, this is just meant for us to and K1 is easier. K1-2 is easier because there's not as much there. So the point of today is to just get more familiar across grade levels and have more conversations, not just about what our units are, but what are the major skills that we want kids to have across our grade teams. So if you're like, we would prefer to look at the overall, or we're in opinion writing out right now, like I think that is totally, you guys can take it and run with it. Whatever you see best fit. We want this time to just be practical and useful.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good. Okay, awesome. Thanks, guys. I'm gonna go check on Kinder real quick. I'll be back in like 15 minutes.
Okay.
Hi, Kinder.
Hi.
I'm gonna pull us all together and the K1-2 in like 15, 20 minutes. I'm gonna go meet the 3-5, but I just wanted to check in. This time is kind of weird, I'll be honest. I was kind of like, are people gonna be like, why are we on the screen together? And we can go. It's just meant to be time to work together. I just wanted to see if we have like questions about that, or you feel good about what you're looking at. Kinder is obviously very different than trying to unpack progressions at 8th grade. So I was even thinking for this team, don't feel like you have to stick with elaboration and development. And honestly, a lot of what you have is the same.
Right. Yeah. I think that's what we were talking. We were just, talking about our overall like writers workshop and like just having really good conversations about writing and what we do in the classroom. We've looked at the progressions.
Talk about yourselves. You guys are great. I think as long as you're chatting about what you're seeing and what you're doing, yes, yes, yes. The other thing you can look at that I find really helpful in K-1-2, if you're like, let's talk about something else or whatever. You guys have plenty to talk about, I'm sure. But looking at the student samples, not the adult sample, but like looking at the kid writing in Pathways, and it's on Heinemann too, like on the Heinemann resources. To me, it's always really interesting to look at the kid writing and think like, where do the writers in my classroom fall compared to some of what I see right here. So if you were looking for something else to have a shared conversation around, you could go there.
Quick question, Megan.
Yeah.
We were talking about, the pie chart that you shared, and of course, like how important it is for the independent practice time with our kiddos. But like how every classroom from K through second has co-teachers.
Yep.
But like it would be really beneficial. It's not we have lots of turnover, but like for some help with during that independent time, like what one-on-one looks like, what small group looks like.
We're going to go there. We're going to go there in little pieces. So hang tight. Okay. We will go there when we talk K2. I'll address that and I'll talk about a couple other things. Okay.
Perfect.
That sound okay? Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. I'm going to leave you guys and go jump in with 3-5, and then I'll pull us all I'll pull you with the 1-2 teachers in about 15 minutes. Okay. 20 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
Hi, Diana. I was just popping around and checking on a few of the other groups, but I'm going to move you with me to 3-5 right now. Jump in with them. Does that sound okay?
I realized once I jumped out, I couldn't get back in anywhere. I was like, oh, I'm trapped.
I saw you here. I just was checking in real quick.
Yeah.
They have their own copy or them up in the room. Is really helpful because of course you have the kids that can sit down and right away get it, but then even just thinking of how Megan teaches, like every time she puts that under the camera of like, oh yes, those 5 things, oh yes, this, having that up in the room, just as your silent teacher, I think that, and again, cross subjects, I think for math and for all the, remembering all the steps, I think that's just a really helpful thing.
I have not used flow map or tree maps with students. I was taught more the method of just an outline format. So I was wondering, would somebody have a digital one that they could send or recommend? Because that would actually be really, really good. We're just starting the third opinion writing just this coming week, and that would be a great way for them to organize.
Anna, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was saying I just made one I could send you, Andrea.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I also have extra books
binders
of those too.
I have a binder in my room, Andrea, that I could give you that has all of them in there. Or Anna, if you want them to. So it's like less work. You don't have to make them. You can just like copy them.
I would love to see your book, Sheridan.
Yep. I've got extras.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Those
Hi,
sound
guys.
really
How
good
are you?
and be organized.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean to be like popping in and shifting conversation. We can keep adding on to the conversation. I'm checking in and had a couple of things I can share specifically to this group, or if we have questions. I made a little bulleted list of a few things. Anna, I cannot, because I am not hosting. I'm the host, but I'm not. During lunch, I'm going to ask Elizabeth to change her settings on Zoom, because it's not even, it must be a Zoom setting, because it won't even let me, the advanced, oh no, wait, it changed. Hang on. Before it was like blacked out and I couldn't click on anything.
You're good. I just asked her if I could share screen so I could just show you the chart real quick, Andrea.
There we go. Okay. Oops, one. Okay, now we're good. Now it should work. Sorry, before I had checked in, like, sometimes these things do crazy things, and I'm like, it wasn't letting me share. But you should be able to share
it
now.
Still says no, but that's okay. I'll just send it later.
Okay, we'll see. I'll try. I'll try to work on it during lunch or ask Elizabeth to help me. It's since we're on her Zoom or that Zoom, I'm trying to.
Oh, not a problem. Thank
Okay.
you. No worries.
Sounds good. Perfect. I know I'm jumping in mid conversation when you guys have been talking amongst yourselves. I heard a couple of things that we were talking about just as I popped in. We can spend this time together talking about, again, I've got a couple like big bullet points that I was thinking specifically for 3-5. We can ask, now would be a great time if you guys had a chance to take a peek at the awkward videos of the lab site is what I call it, but the teaching video from the classroom teaching that we did in the middle of January. We could talk about that right now, and any other what you feel might be some big questions that you're having. I heard Sheridan when I came in, us just having this conversation around like the resources and tools that we give kids. And we are going to talk, we're going to dip more into that this afternoon. I'm excited because I think that to me is one of the biggest keys for workshop teaching. And I think it's not always crystal clear in the units. And so what ends up happening is that we have kids during this independent time that are not being independent and are not, or not, and because they're waiting for us to tell them what to do. And I think that it goes, you know, it's interesting because, and don't take this the wrong way when I say it. I feel like I need to be careful that it doesn't come off the wrong way. But even just now when I was in middle school and I popped into you, we're talking about like, here's this organizer that I give. I think that's what you were talking about, your tree maps. And those are good for kids, right? And middle school's talking about, this is our power paragraph and this is what we want to be careful with that because we don't want it to be that when kids get to high school and their teacher doesn't say use the power paragraph, or when they get to 6th grade and their teacher doesn't give them the tree, that they're like, I don't know what to do. And I think so it's knowing that tools are really good and useful for kids. So that's where I need to clarify. I'm not saying don't use it. I'm like a huge fan of organizers and systems and structures. It's how do we get them to use those independently? How do we get them to use them without their teacher? And that's what we're going to talk about this afternoon. I have some practical little ways so that it's not, you know, Madeline is waiting for me to come and give her the next organizer before she'll write her next chapter. And I think sometimes we have kids who literally paralyze or stop without, if their teacher doesn't like spoon feed them something. I think we've all been there. And I think there, you know, you look at your range of writers and there's the kids we're not as worried about are fine, like whatever, they're flexible. But the ones we worry the most about are the ones who sit here during that time, wherever I just flipped it, who sit here during this time and stare at the wall until we come around because they've been so used to having somebody like give them the way it's supposed to go. So I think it's a fine line. Again, I'm not saying that because it's a bad thing by any means, but it's just an interesting thought. And I'm excited because, like I said, this afternoon, I'll help you guys with a few practical things that can help with that. The other two big things, so we can keep talking about that if we want to. I'm happy to. And I think it would be, that's why we're having these conversations, because wouldn't it be great for the middle school team that's talking right now to know that the tree maps are really successful for your, I don't even know what that is. I'm just making that up because I popped in and that's what you guys were talking about. But wouldn't that be great if like the 6th grade teacher knew that that was helpful? So when 6th grade teachers are saying that they don't know outlines and you're like, yes, they do. I've taught them the tree map. That they just are familiar with what those things are.
It was an all school thing that we did like 5 years ago where everyone had to practice like thinking maps. So people were familiar with sequencing, cause and effects, compare, contrast, like all those like critical thinking skills. Like we were all doing PD and learned those things, but I know there's high turnover. So like not everyone knows how to do it. But like middle school teachers would know, hypothetically, they would know what the maps were.
I didn't mean to, sorry, thank you, Jessica. I didn't mean to like go on that tangent, and by no means, but I just think that's was helpful, right? So that K-8 knew, that's why you guys did those things. Now I feel like I just like totally went on a tangent and you're like, no, Megan, stop. But interesting to think about, like Jessica, I'm even wondering, is there like a place as a school where it's like, here are the things that like are common across K-8, or here are the, and you don't want that to take autonomy, but it's almost like in addition to the learning progressions, a list of like common terminology used, not just from here, but like common tools and common terminology. And I think that could be really helpful, just to have a list of our common tools, common terminology, make it pretty brief. But that could be a really nice place to go as a grade team. And even, you know, one way you could do that, I'm thinking Sheridan and Diana who are on here, like just have each grade team write out, here's the tools we use, here's the terminology we use, just like pretty basic. And then let's compare contrast across K-8 and where can we come to some common understandings.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, Megan, because I am kind of experiencing that right now. I feel like I've been checking in with Elizabeth quite a bit, because we are currently in our persuasive unit, and so the things that I'm focusing on, particularly right now with our like thesis and our claim and like our evidence, I want to make sure that that's what they also focus on in middle school, because I want to set them up so that they know, like, they're going through the 5th grade writing process, and then when they get to middle school, I don't want it to be like, well, last year Ms. Dubas taught me all this stuff and we have no idea now what Ms. Duff is going to teach us. So I was happy to, you know, talk with Elizabeth about like, yeah, we're using the same type of terminology, even just like the kids hear claim a lot. I talk about like their claim, I talk about their evidence, I talk about the thesis. So I think that would be beneficial, even like from what 4th grade talks about, you know, with Jessica. I don't know last year if they've like heard what a claim is or like what evidence, and I'm sure they have, and I know that you've worked on it, but just to know, like, is this the same words that Ms. Wickman used last year? Like, we talked about like transitional phrases, like we do a lot of the same stuff, obviously, because it all builds, but we've never sat down as a whole school being like, in 6th grade you're going to keep building on your claims and your evidence, so maybe call it a claim instead of like your argument.
And that's where this comes into play, right, Anna? Like, units of study aside, it is a curriculum across K-8. It's something, there's nothing else that lays out. But like, if you can look here and it's like the writer states his claim or the writer states her claim, you're like, oh, they've heard that. But that's only if we're sticking to the fidelity of the tool. By fidelity, I don't mean like you can't do anything else, but like, you know, transitions. I was in one school and one teacher was using linking words, one teacher was using movement words, one teacher was using transition words. And it's like, that's not helpful for kids to not know what those things are. I also think like for CEA, it goes both ways, right? So then if I'm teaching, middle school teachers teach, claim evidence, CER, CEA, I forget what school I'm in. Even that is like, it's not about the acronym, it's what you're doing. The reasoning and the analysis are both the same way, and they're both elaboration. There are ways that you can elaborate on your answer. So I think it goes both ways. It's how do we use this language in other areas, but also what language do we use in other areas that can be brought into this? Does that make sense?
Which I love. And I think that kind of led our conversation to what Jessica's point was, like, the teachers here used to know, like, everybody used thinking maps versus like the chart that I'm currently using. I just have it on my own. Luckily we are using the same terminology, but those like supplemental things that we're all doing, like Jessica makes like thinking maps, you know, maybe Andrea has a different thing in 3rd grade, and then maybe middle school does a different thing. I'm sorry, my dog is making noise, but that's what we're how that led to that.
And then I think the big picture is then how do we get kids to transfer that into anything? And Diana, I know you and I had a conversation about this even when we were doing some planning of like, the goal of this is not for them to just succeed at OSM. Like, we want them to get to high school and to like be able to write a response or write an essay, even if those teachers don't use thinking maps. So then the goal is, how do we like start to a scaffold that you insert, or a program that you use, true of any of these things, can only go so far as the transference of the skill. So any type of scaffolding, I always like think about a building. You wouldn't keep that scaffolding up forever. Eventually there's a plan for removal. So even saying to kids, for the first couple times, we're going to use these thinking maps, but I'm going to start to pull them away when you're ready, or try it without this, or try it with so that it's like they start to make that bridge, so that if another teacher, or say they move to another school, say their family moves and they go someplace and the teachers don't use thinking maps or don't use the units of study or can we ensure, or how do we help ensure that those students are still successful? And I think that's where it's the common language, but then it's also the flexibility in the language and understanding like when to pull things back and put it more onto the kids, and really thinking about that term transference. One thing that I wanted to share with the 3-5 group really quick, I don't mean to like pop in and drop my agenda, but just since we had little bits of time with grade teams, there was two things specific that I thought with your writing units for this team that were important to note. I just tried to and this is kind of, don't tell anybody, but this is the team, I taught 5th grade for a long time. So I feel like this is always the team where I feel like I know the most or connect the most with you guys. And I feel there's 3 big things to think about in the teaching of writing. Well, in addition to everything else, but 3 big things I want to share. Number 1, keep in mind that starting in 3rd grade is the first time that we are asking for students to sustain one topic across a unit or even across weeks. In kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, it's literally write a new piece with a new topic, write a new piece with a new topic, write a new piece with a new topic. They're getting their repeated practice by it's harder for them. They don't have as much to say in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. So that's a huge thing to remember, that's going to be, it's hard for kids to be like, wait, what? I'm supposed to tell one story for like a week or 2 weeks? That's hard. I don't know how to do that. And they're going to struggle with it, but that's okay. Because eventually they have to get to the point where you can't just say, I'm in the middle of a report and I want to start something new. You have to kind of stick with things for a while. So I'm going to pause real quick. Diana, Miss F, where does Miss F go? Or can somebody tell me where? Somebody just popped it with you guys?
Yeah, she's 3rd and 4th grade.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry. Okay, so that was number 1, is just keep that in mind. The second thing to keep in mind is that in the kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade units, very similarly, students are not necessarily writing in a notebook. They're writing, this is how the units are taught. They're writing in very scaffolded, speaking of thinking maps, very scaffolded packets of paper, booklets, we call them. And so it might be if they're in a how-to unit, there's a box with some lines next to it. Or it might be that there's a picture box and then lines underneath it for what comes first, then finally. That's a scaffold in the kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade units. And that scaffold comes away in the 3, 4, 5 units because you're trying to teach them what it means to organize themselves on their own without always having to be, and again, giving the thinking maps alongside of it. I think that's a perfect example. But instead of you having to always hand it to them, how can they use those thinking maps on their own and in their writing, and how can they use the notebooks? So know that that's the second big change. So number 1, topics change. Topic 6 the same. Number 2 is thinking about sorry, Elizabeth just texted. I'm like, that's the person I'm supposed to be looking for her name when she texts. The second thing is thinking where kids are writing, and that changes. The third thing, it sounds like you guys, I put down in my notes, but I'm going to skip it because it sounds like you already tackled this. For the information writing units in 4th and 5th grade, I said this already, it's not about the American Revolution or westward expansion, it's the skills that you're teaching. So it sounds like you guys have already kind of figured that out. That was the third thing. And then here's the 4th big thing. One trick for your writing units, and I think this is true in anything that they carry through, and if we want to talk about transference, I think this is really important, is to keep in mind the writing process as you teach the units. And honestly, if I were to go back and revise the units, I would almost want to, in that front cover, put, not that it would be up to me, but although Lucy would do the same thing. I led a specialty group around the writing process with Lucy for a while, and we used to talk about this all the time. I'm just looking for an example, sorry. But to go into like this front cover and to literally write the part of the process for each session, because it gets very lost. And here's what I want to say about that. What we think sometimes as teachers, or what we portray on kids, is that they spend the majority of their time inside of a writing unit drafting. And we actually want to kind of shift that, okay? Because when you think about the first step, and I say to kids, this is what you do. This is what I do as an adult when I email. This is what I do when I have to plan for a lesson. That I start by just generating ideas. And I don't just generate ideas, I generate ideas and I plan. And this is where I'm like, my organization is coming in. I'm thinking of what I might write about. And in most units, kids are generating ideas and planning for a while. With planning, it might be that they rehearse. So another word to put here is rehearsal. So they might be like trying little snippets out, but it's not like from day one, they're writing their piece. And then at some point, you're gonna say to them, pick your topic, and they draft. Now, here's a key to the units that I think, again, sometimes gets lost. If generating an idea and rehearsal is, let's say, anywhere like 2 to 4 days or 2 to 4 sessions, and this is, again, not just the units of study, like this would be anything that you would teach them. The drafting is, think about the word draft. It's not your final product. It's fast and furious. Let me just get my thoughts on the page. So when I had to, write a speech for my sister's wedding, I thought of ideas and I went home and I just cranked it out. So it's really helpful to keep drafting short, like thinking 1 to 2 sessions. And especially as 3-5 teachers, here's a trick for you. You might be like, there's no way they're gonna finish it. There's no way they're gonna do this. But I also bet you will say to me, kids don't revise. Kids don't wanna go back. Kids come up to me all the time and they say, I'm done. And that's usually because they spend too long drafting. If I spend 2 weeks drafting, I'm gonna tell you you're crazy when you tell me to go make revisions, or when you say, when you're done, you've just begun. So really trying to put more of an emphasis on revision over drafting. So if students have some sort of flash draft written, and again, it's in the units, it just gets lost, then they're spending their sessions reworking different parts and trying it again and trying it in different ways and looking at their, literally like you reheat pizza, looking at their draft again in different big, large scale revision ways. And I think sometimes what goes south in the units is when we spend too long drafting, you have kids who aren't really learning anything new or practicing new skills, because I keep going through my sessions, but they're still like, oh, I'm still drafting. I'm not elaborating yet. I'm not working on my lead yet. I'm still drafting. And so this is just going and going and going. Like sometimes I keep saying their writing is getting worse and worse and worse. And we've got like 20 pages of a draft versus 2 pages of a draft with some big revisions. And then go ahead.
I know in Lucy, there's like very guided mini lessons for all the generating ideas, the plan process, that rehearsal part. But I guess the revision part was always difficult for me. Are there a lot of sessions that actually teach you the steps for revision?
Yep, and let me finish this real quick, Jessica, and then I'll show you. I want to show you guys where this is at. I think another big thing to keep in mind as 3-5 teachers is that editing is not the same as revision. And kids are often taught that they're I just pulled a unit out, Jessica, to show you, but editing is, I always say, think of a room. Think of like my apartment right now. If I wanted to have a new vision, let's say I need to turn this into an office space. I could do it, but it would be like, get out all the furniture, add cubicles, maybe add more light or plugs for me to plug things in, versus editing might just be, let me move this piece of furniture. Let me just like put new flowers out. So editing is different than having a new vision, right? Editing is like looking at those little changes that make a big difference before, at the end of the day, making it public. And that's why I call the end of it publication, because publication isn't perfection, it's just making our writing public. The units, Jessica, and that's why I'm sharing this, because that's the intention of the units. But we as teachers sometimes live too long in their drafting and forget to go there. So when you look here, actually, let me look. I've got the Art of Information out from 3rd grade, just because it's what I pulled. So here you've got they're organizing and they're teaching each other, organizing new structures. This might not be the best one, but if you look at even the share session of this and read closely, and I know it's fine print, they shouldn't keep drafting through all of these sessions, reaching to write well. And again, we can knock the resource. I'll knock it with you. It'd be nice if this said revision. And it's not that black and white, but these sessions, studying a mentor text for elaboration, making connections, balancing facts and ideas, researching facts, that's all revision. That's not just draft with this, because if it is, it's just like they're trying things for one day versus like really using these skills. So again, I'm like, shouldn't have said, on the one hand, I'm like, don't say it if it doesn't say it here in the book, but just keep that in mind, Jessica, in your units. All units are really written to go this way. Is it black and white in them? Not necessarily. So what ends up, or it's in the fine print at the end. And again, here's me knocking a resource you have. So what we end up doing is we just let this go on and on and on, and kids just skip this part. So just keep that in mind when you're in your units, to try and keep this shorter so that you can keep this bigger. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the conferencing happens in the revision part, where you bring the mentor text or you bring whatever skill it is they're teaching in the revision. So that to me is when when I think of all the units I've done, it's like huge chunk on brainstorming. Like that takes the longest. It's like, all the kids are like, when do we start writing? When do we start writing? It's all like that. So then the drafting part, but the revision part is where I always focus with conferencing.
Well, and teaching them, like that revision part is part of what will keep them independent. Like that's like, if I have a lot of strategies for revision and I own that as a student, that's going to give me things that I can work on during that independent practice time. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing to just keep in mind is even when they're generating, and this is, again, these are just things, that's why I'm here to share with us. Like when they're generating, trying to get them to try things out. It's not just listing ideas, but rehearsal. So let me try this little chunk. Let me try this little piece. It's not my full draft yet. So I share that process with you guys because when I was thinking about today, and I was thinking even, it came up in middle school because they said, well, kids just need to know, not in a bad way. I forget who said this. Somebody said, I won't call him out. He said, well, kids just need to do it because it's good for them. And I'm like, yes, but that's not the reason why you continue to do something, is because it's good for me. If I know the purpose, I'm doing that because revision is going to really help me have a new vision for my writing, or I'm doing that because I'm rehearsing so that I know how my draft is going to go. It helps give us some purpose. And I also think if we're thinking integrating knowledge across content areas, talking about this type of thing in any area is really, really helpful. And I think actually this revision area is what kids are least apt to do on their own. And I would love to just shift our language in a little bit to start to get them to be more apt to do that on their own, instead of waiting for me to be the one to kind of read through it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I feel like this is really helpful, especially I teach 5th grade writing, and this is really good. It's, this is what we've been doing. I like it. What I'm interested in, my other 5th grade teachers, Stephanie and Samantha, are also here. Samantha teaches math and science, and I'm curious as to how this can be applied for math and science. I feel like with social studies, we do a lot of writing. It's great. We do the same type of thing. Same with religion. We're doing that. But if you have any particular tips on math and science and how you would use that wheel, that's what I would be very interested in knowing. Because the whole chart that you showed, love it. I have that engraved in my brain at this point. But that's very geared towards writing, which we do, and it's awesome.
So let's think what it would sound like, Anna. I love that you're making these connections in math. Well, if I go to answer a math problem, this is where they'd be writing an explanation, or even how they're going to approach a math problem. Let's make a plan, and even just use that term, make a plan, rehearse how your answer is going to go before you put it on the page. Say it in your mind, think it across your fingers before you just start writing the answer. Another thing could be in math, my goodness, to get kids to revise their answers or revise an answer. When I taught math, there was something called My Favorite No that I used to use. And I would give kids a problem of an incomplete problem or a wrong problem, and they would have to revise that problem, have a new vision, look at it through a new lens, new set of glasses, to revise it in a way that makes sense. When you have your students check their work in math, they're editing. Like that's what they're doing. So just using, like, just seeing that what I'm asking them to do is that's the way we think through anything that we have to output, right? That it might not be exactly the writing process, although if you are asking them to do a short math response, you'd want the same thing, to have them think about how it's going to go. And I think so often when it comes to math or science or social studies, kids don't think about their writing. They don't make a plan, or we as teachers give them the plan. And I'm not saying everything now becomes writing, but just taking 10 seconds to say, before I hand out this sheet that's going to give you how it's going to go, just think, if it were up to you, how would you plan an answer for this? Or how would you plan this report? I wonder if you were thinking the same thing as me, and then handing it out so that you're giving kids a chance to think through their plan before they jump into their own work, right? I think it's making those connections at the end of the day. Does that help, Anna? Okay, go ahead, Sue, and then I'm gonna pop into K2.
I was gonna say that idea of rehearsal helps them generalize and abstract ideas.
Yeah.
So it seems powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, and we don't, like, we as adults sometimes don't rehearse. We just start putting it on the page, and I think that's where teachers hold more of the ownership instead of kids. And I think as we're talking about writing, it's not just the writing skills, it's the who holds the ownership, and then how can that carry through. Okay, so I am gonna pop into K2. For this group, you guys were having conversations before I came in, continue, but then I really wanna stress, and I don't know, had you guys already dipped into the progressions or phase 1 of what I had shared? Okay, awesome. So you might continue that, looking at those progressions or looking at the sample pieces. But let's continue to have those shared conversations. Anna, even just as we came in, when we were thinking, like, what are common, as you were saying, wouldn't it be so helpful to have a list of, like, some of the common things? Those are the conversations that I want us to continue. So process what I just said. I'm gonna come back this afternoon, so I'm sure you probably have questions or wonderings. But talk amongst yourselves for about the next 15 minutes and continue going through those, not just talk amongst yourselves, continue going through those phases that I shared before. And we'll see you guys shortly. Sound good? Okay. I'm gonna go, sorry, where am I going? There we go, okay.
Sounds like to help them understand oh, hey, this makes absolutely no sense at all.
I think we have Google Read and Write for everybody. I'd have to double check, but I think we have it for everybody. So that's something, it's certainly a tool to use. And also what's interesting for punctuation too, because when it reads it back, it will just, and you can slow it down so that they can really hear it, but they'd be like, oh my gosh, it doesn't ever stop. There's no, and you're like, oh, because there's no punctuation.
What is Google Read and Write?
Oh, it's amazing. Go for it, Sheridan.
It is an extension on Google Chrome, or I'm thinking, and it will has speech to text and text to speech features. So I use it a lot with kids who have trouble getting ideas down on the page, so they can speak their writing out. And then they can also listen to it back.
I am putting directions for how to get to it and how to use it. I'm like multitasking now. It was awesome during the pandemic for just knowing how to, or for teachers giving spoken feedback to kids instead of.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Oh, it's amazing for conferring. So you can speak your feedback. Sorry, I'm talk amongst yourselves for a second. I'm pulling it up and I'm gonna add it to the Padlet. I just wanna make sure.
And I think that sounds great, but like Sheridan said before, like our low kids, even though we want them to, like maybe we have to read it in so they can hear, because like she said, they can't even read their own writing. Mm-hmm. So they're just going to speak it into the computer and it's not actually what they have written.
Yeah.
So in that sense,
in which case I'm okay with that though. I'm going to pause. I don't know if that's where you were going, but like their talk, especially in K1-2, will not match their writing. Kids will be far more sophisticated in talk than they are in their writing. And you want that. You want them to continue to use the sophisticated talk, even though that doesn't necessarily transfer to their writing right away. Like I think of my nephew as a perfect example. He's a kindergartner. The kid says the craziest things and the most hilarious and beautiful and amazing things and that he gets from his brothers. And I look at his writing and he can barely write his name. I should give him a little bit more credit. It's beyond that. But that's why oral rehearsal is huge. So just remembering that they don't always have to, I feel like I just jumped on whoever just said that, but it's a good reminder to remind us.
No, we totally, but we were saying like how we were discussing, can we get those low kids who can't get their thoughts on paper and their sentences don't make sense at all? How can we get them to make sense? So we were talking about like, they could say it out loud, but then like someone suggested, oh, maybe if they read it into that program, they'll hear that their sentence doesn't make sense. But we were discussing like, they can't really read their writing. So then they end up talking about it, which is great. But like trying to transition them through like, okay, the sentence you just said, how can we get more of that on the piece of paper? Because you only wrote 2 of those words.
Yep.
So how can we try to get more of that thought down?
Yep. And oh, go ahead.
Or I wonder if for those little kids, all right, so they say it to the Google Read and Write, it says it back to them, and then, at least for my little kids, I can think of one in particular. He says it to me, and he does not remember what he says, like when he goes to write. So I almost feel like if it could read it back to him, and then he could like remind himself of like, oh, this is what I want to write. Maybe that'll help him get his ideas down.
I think it's tricky in K2 because if they have any speech issues, it can be a challenge getting. It's not a perfect system. It's I don't know, Meg. I think like what we're trying to get at, like strategies to get it from.
Yep. Well, and I think is that okay if I chime in with this?
Yes, please.
It's being very mindful, and it's so hard, especially in K1-2 of this. And so I'm not sitting here to like, but I think sometimes our expectations or our grade level expectations sometimes exceed where students are at. And it's hard because we're trying to get them up to where they're at as a grade team. We all know this to be true. And I want our expectations to be high, but I also want kids to be able to perform independently. And when this is helpful to think about. When the teacher has a lot of control over something, the output will always be better than when students are more independent. However, the learning and the transference will be better if they're doing it independently. So I think especially as K1-2 teachers, sometimes we want the output to be a certain way. So we tend to do more heavy lifting so that it looks the way we want it to, because when they do it on their own, it doesn't look very good, or they only have 2, that's not the right way of saying it. They only have 2 words on the page. And so we try and make this leap from 2 words on the page to full, like to 3 sentences. I'm just using these as little examples. I'm not being, but I'm probably not even the best examples. But is there a middle ground before the 2 words? Let's just get 3 words. Or if their kids are just sketching pictures right now, let's go back to that and let's focus on that. And that's where I think it can be really hard, especially in K1-2, because you have such a wide range of where they're at. And that's why the oral rehearsal is really important. But remembering that this just came up in 3.5. Units aside, like the units are teaching. I think sometimes we put so much emphasis on a unit and the output of what the unit wants them to have the how-to, or the unit wants them, that we forget that we need to differentiate based on where they're at. And remembering that, and then I want you guys to chime in and tell me if this resonates with you at all. I'm not, by no means it's not perfect, but to remember that first, where kids start is that they are drawing, and they're in kinder, when they're like, this is why we give bigger picture boxes, because they're spending the beginning of their time communicating through drawings. And yes, they can say real sentences, but I'm going to start there. And then after they draw, they start to move from drawing to adding labels. And you guys know this to be true. And you're like, okay, awesome. Now we've got some labels. And now after oh, great. Okay, thank you. After they draw and have labels, I see you, Grace, just one second. After they draw and have labels, well, now they draw and they have labels, and they start to put words on the lines, or they start to write sentences, but I'm gonna put that in quotes. But their sentences might only have 2 words, to what you were saying before, Brittany. So now I'm like, okay, well, instead of just taking 2 words, now I'm gonna try and, maybe they're sure they could still draw and labels, but now I'm going to try to have them take their labels and add to their sentences by looking at the labels that were on their drawing. Does that make sense? So now they've got a drawing with all these labels, and I say more about that. Look at your labels, Janet. Put some of what you have in those labels in that sentence. It's going to be really awkward and weird at first, but you're like, awesome, we got this. And then eventually you get to a place where they start to write words on the page and use sketches to elaborate or say more about those words. Does that make sense? So you're like, you really, and you guys know all of this, but you're trying to make this bridge until they can get to the point where they can just put sentences on the page. So even if my first grade unit is having students do something that's right here, if I have a student who's not ready for that yet, I'm going to be more focused on what's right here or what's right here, depending on where they're at. I think this, I will say this a lot to 3-5 teachers that are working with ELs, and they're trying to get their ELs to write a 5-paragraph essay. And I'm like, they're not going to be able to on their own. Try and figure out what's the entry point for what they can do on their own. And then what's the next step for what they can do on their own. And I think that sometimes to me is a nice shift in my own thinking of like, not what do I want them to do, but what can they do and what's the next step. And when I say what can they do on their own without me? And then once I see what they can do on their own without me, then I add one next step. And one way to do that, sorry, Grace, I'm gonna stop after this final statement, I'm rambling. I don't know if you guys have done this, but one way to find that out is before you teach a unit. This is where it's scary as a teacher because you're like, they're not gonna do anything, but you just have to let that happen. You literally give them a packet of paper and you say, I wanna know what you know about information writing. How could you teach somebody about something you know a lot about on the page? Kindergartners, you've got 15 minutes. Bring it. Show me. Write an information piece. And so badly you want to like, it's so awkward and you're like, oh my God, I just want to help them. This is horrible. They can't, but you'll see something and that shows you what they can do on their own. So like that, what I would call that pre-on-demand, where we have to bite our tongue and not tell them, like, just think of something you know a lot about. And I might say, you know a lot about recess. You know a lot about religion. You know a lot about kindergarten. You know a lot about first grade. You know a lot about our class turtle. Okay, write me an information piece, and whatever they can do there is your starting point. Does that make sense to you guys? That was kind of a lot. Grace, do you want to chime in? Did you have your hand up or a thought?
I did. I think I kind of forgot what I was going to say, to be honest. And that's okay. No, that's okay. I will think back, and I'll add in the chat if I can.
You guys were talking about the 2 sentence or the 2 words. You were talking about trying to get kids to do.
I remember.
Oh, go for it.
Because I was interested in what Grace was going to say there. I think it was at the point, Megan, that you were talking about the importance at this grade level, which is sort of mind-blowing to me to think about, that going from doing more talking to giving kids more time independently to be able to work on their own, making that shift. And that's, Grace, when you raised your hand. Does that help?
No, it does. Thank you, Diana. So I feel like this year, I think all of us have had to kind of rethink our teaching, especially Writers Workshop, in terms of how we do a mini lesson, how we teach things explicitly, even just the way that we structure our classroom and how we sit while we're doing it. Mm-hmm. I feel like I have really learned this year to let go a little bit more. And I think, Meg, not to like reinforce the whole COVID thing because I'm over it, but I think that some of these kids are really struggling with other skills. Like, yes, would I love my Gracie to absolutely be able to generate a sentence and do it completely? Yeah, but that's not where she's at. Sure. And I feel like my Treaty, she needs a little bit more social help this year. She needs some more nurturing in terms of that. So I feel like coming in, and our kids are really high and we're lucky. So we're all, well, how can we get the lower kids higher? Well, these other lower kids, they're not there yet. So what are the skills that they need to work on? Whether it's having that oral conversation that no one at home is having with them because you just got to get things done at home. Okay. So I just feel like I'm trying to look more at their kind of social, emotional piece this year. Like Gracie the other day, and I felt so sad. I wanted to cry because I was not being a good teacher. She wrote all these things and she was so excited. And I was like, what on God's green earth? Let's rewrite. And I broke her heart. I broke her heart. And I thought, that's not me.
Yeah.
She put all of this and she was excited, but she's not a Graham who just wrote 3 sentences on space or a 4-page book. She's Gracie, beginning of the kindergarten year. So what does she need? And I feel like I don't know. That's just, I think I've just looked at my teaching a little bit more just to kind of.
It was going off of what you said, Grace. I was thinking about how phonics and phonics skills are never, I think up to very recently, it was never addressed to that. And like you said, we're very lucky. We have very high students, but at the same time, we have I don't know, for the lack of a better word, a gap for the students who cannot get there.
Yeah.
And then I just feel it's something that, it lacks, like all the phone, like they can tap out. If they're able to tap out, maybe they'll be able to write more, or even them boosting their confidence for having the phonemic skills they need to put that on the paper too. So
well, and having that reinforced, somebody else was going to say something and chime in, but I'm like, having that reinforced at home sometimes doesn't help. Like my sister will be like, no, Johnny, here's how you spell Christmas, or she'll write it down for him. And he has to like sit there and painfully copy it. He's not having to use his phonics skills. And so parents don't necessarily know how to even help. They're like, sound it out. Meanwhile, the kid doesn't know how to sound things. They're like, what do you mean sound it out? I don't know. Instead of like, what letters do you hear? Is there a part of that word that you know? And so I love that you're saying that, Anna. I think that's so important. The phonics piece, and where are they at with that, and how does that apply to their writing? And it might mean that their writing doesn't make sense to us, but they're practicing some of the skills that we want them to be practicing.
Well, I was just going to say, thinking, Grace, about what you were saying about, your little guys in your class who need to talk. And like Megan, you were talking about how your kids have a hard time remembering what they want to write. I don't know, Megan, maybe you have a better suggestion, but I was just thinking like this, and this is a fun social and emotional piece. Like, and I will be honest, I don't incorporate this into my classroom a lot. I actually haven't this year. But like oral storytelling, where they can then like find a friend and act out and tell the story. Like it just popped in my mind of like, maybe that would be something, you could pair them up with the person across the table from them, or, even like they come up with their own moves and do it. And then they can tell the story to the class. Like that just might be a fun way for them to get talking.
Hey, Meg, we do that during morning meeting. Erin and I do that, where I'll say, once there was a dinosaur. And I'm telling you something, some classes are better and everyone has a different piece. They are so stifled, these kids sometimes. They don't necessarily think outside of the box enough, I feel like, to kind of make the story go. They're like, he ate dinner in school. It's like, no, let's use this oral storytelling to strengthen some other skills. I feel like some creativity, some imagination. So that's a good idea, Meg. We're gonna do that on Tuesday.
Erin,
I was gonna say we should do that Tuesday.
Yeah.
Oh, so 2 things I was gonna say. Spot on. When they're doing the oral storytelling then, and maybe it doesn't have to be the first round, now get a booklet of paper, orally storytell, and not just once, but like, okay, first, then, next, finally. And so there, Bill's not on this. Somebody said that about he needs to be let back in the Zoom. He's not on it. Sorry, Sheridan, I don't see him on here. He's not in my participants.
Grace, our Gracie was doing that when she was reading her book to the class the other day.
And then having them do it over, sorry, Sheridan, we'll get them in a second, but doing it over and over again. So like, don't just tell it once, but like, okay, tell it again, and like touching the pages as you tell it is amazing practice. And you guys probably already do that. I also was thinking the second thing, the oral storytelling, the touching the pages, the next thing I was going to say is shared writing. And that's like we could have a whole day on that. But I'm like, if they are doing some of that oral storytelling, coming back together, and Brittany, I was thinking this even when you were talking about, like, sometimes we worry so much about like the kids who just have a couple things to say and we need to like get them up to speed as quickly as possible. When you were first sharing, this came to my mind. After kids, during your morning meeting, let's orally storytell. Ooh, let's write a story together. Who has the first line? Like, once upon a time, there was a dinosaur. Okay, what should go next? I'll say it. Okay, I know you can't turn and talk closely, but turn and shout it to the air. What should come next? And then I take one of those lines and I write it down on a demo page for them to see. And then I'm like, oh gosh, what should come next? And you can do this. I actually think it's awesome for small group, for really struggling writers, like a group of 4 to do some shared writing together, because then they feel proud that they can do what the rest of their class can do, or at least they see an example. Obviously, you want them to also couple that with their independent practice time, but that's one nice way to make the bridge, is to do some more shared writing with them. Does that make sense to everybody? I just got excited. I was like, oh, I just did some shared writing with kids the other day. We actually were doing it with words from their sight word list. So we gave them 8 words from their sight word list. And I said, let's write a story together, and we have to use these words, and let's practice them. And so we were doing it together, and they were successful. They weren't writing on their own. They weren't, but it felt like they were kind of doing kind of all these things together. So many things to think about. I'm going to pull us all back together so we can break for lunch. Thanks for letting me hijack your conversation for just a few minutes. We'll come back this afternoon and I'll pop back in and you guys can keep talking amongst yourselves. But before we go there, I'm going to close the breakout rooms and let's head back to the main room. For some reason, Ms. F and Bill, you were not showing up on my participants. I am sorry that you were just there forever hanging out. I apologize. I'm sorry. It wasn't showing up when I was with.
That's all right. It was only a few minutes.
I should have given everybody my cell phone so you could. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No worries.
In 5th grade, Bree, it showed you were coming on, but then you never got in.
Yeah.
It said you were entering, but then you never got in.
Oh,
I don't know. I've been waiting for over half an hour, so I don't know if it. How long
On
it's
5th
been.
Yeah, she let you in to 5th grade.
Yeah.
But then it never
And
showed
then it
up.
never
there.
popped up. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Bree.
Anna, look at your puppy.
You see me just feeding her pretzels.
Nice.
Her and I both love dogs.
I apologize, Bree and Bill. I promise I was from my end. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, technology. Okay, guys, I hope we had some good conversations. I was popping around. Know that my job, I hope part of my job is to push us to have some good conversations with each other and just different thoughts. It never has to be that we have to change everything we're doing, but as we talk together today, hopefully we're coming to some new ahas or new I guess knowledge together as a group and thinking about how we can best support our students in those reading, writing connections, and using writing as really a vehicle for communication. One big thing came up during the morning sessions that I just wanted to say really quick, and then we'll break for an hour for lunch and then we'll come back together. In the 3-5 group, we were just talking about how these progressions and writing pathways, and again, it doesn't need to be the units of study, and it's not. And when even Lucy will be the first to say that when people are like, I do the Lucy, she's like, no, you don't. You teach writing, you teach reading, and we use these tools and these resources to help us. That was always kind of a funny joke with us there. But one of the things that I hope it can do is to just give us a place to go and something that we all have access to have conversations about what will best support our writers. That said, something that came up in 3-5 was just also talking about, 3-5 was talking about thinking maps, which are a beautiful thing that many schools I work in use. And even how that was maybe something that you had PD around 3 or 4 years ago, or 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know, I'm trying to remember whoever said that. And how maybe there's been turnover, or there's been teachers who weren't there then. And some of you are like, thinking maps, I don't even remember that. I was gone that day. But could there even be a place across a building where we say, here are our common tools, and maybe on that list it's like the learning progressions, our thinking maps, and those example pieces of writing. I'm just making that up, but like basic, I'm talking like 3 or 4 things. Here are our common tools, and it could be K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, or it could just be all together. And then the second thing was not just common tools, but also common terminology. And I think that's what this writing pathways helps us to do. But then I shared also with 6-8 you know, if we're using, it's funny, I always get messed up on what a school is using, CEA or CER, because people go back and forth, which is also ironic because I'm like, okay, that means we want all students in the world to know R and A are the same thing. Although they're not the same word, it's analyzing and reasoning. Analyzing and reasoning are used in the same way, and that's used for elaboration. So just getting students to be understanding how these terms are not just an end all be all, but be flexible to see where does this term fall in writing, and in writing, where does that term fall in other areas. So that might be another conversation that you guys have this afternoon. What are some common tools across your grade team bands that you're giving kids? And what is some common terminology? And eventually down the road, that could be a place to go even as a staff, okay? We are going to break for lunch. Let's break for an hour. I will let you back in if you are not. I feel terrible about that. People were hanging in the breakouts.
I just went back and edited the meeting, and I just took the waiting room off.
Okay, perfect. So people can come in, because I was letting Elizabeth, and Diana was there. I was letting them in. It wasn't working. I don't know what was going on. So anyhow, I apologize. We're good. You won't be in a waiting room. You'll pop in. I'll get you where you need to be. Oh, perfect. CER. Thank you, Elizabeth. But I think right. It's like, whoa. I said to one group, I'm like, what if the student moves to a new state or a new city and they use CEA, and they're like, never learned that before. I'm like, no, you have. You've actually been really good at it. Anyhow, I digress. Have a good lunch. Let's come back let's give it an hour. That was our plan. So we'll come back at 12:22, and then I'll set us up for just a little bit more work time together as grade teams. And then we'll finish up with some stuff all together. Sound good? If there's questions or things you want to be sure we tackle this afternoon, you can speak now or throw them in the chat. And I apologize again. I can't say it enough. Bree and Bill, I'm sorry. Sorry.
No worries. Hey Megan, can you put Andrew and Mike and myself in the group with the middle school for the?
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
I'm not sure where Bree was either. Was she in a group?
They had said to put her with 5. I will just make sure when we come back that you're all together. Thank you, Bill.
Great. Thank you.
Perfect. Anything else needs to be changed, just let me know.
Elizabeth, do you have a second?
I do.
Has my homeroom shared with you the rules they wrote for Silent Ball?
No.
You should ask them for this. They shared it with me. They did it this week. And
I told them you should create a manifesto, and then you need to have a system for enforcing the rules.
they totally took up your suggestion. It's a full page of writing, and they're like going in and making all these edits, and there's the last rule is like, the teacher's rules don't matter, just our rules. It's like, it's so funny and fun and collaborative and just like real life application of so many interesting like skills and things.
Sounds like a checks and balances lesson might be coming up.
Yeah, totally.
That's so cool.
But you should, and they totally willingly shared it with me. So
great.
You should ask them for it when you
I will. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, see you in a little bit.
I opened Elizabeth. I opened a separate, Elizabeth, Sheridan, Bill, Diana. I opened a separate breakout room that I'll just open now in case you guys want to hang there. And I will pop in and join you guys. I mean, break if you want, but I'll pop in there too. Does that work? If I just open it up, are we good? Okay.